This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 4 minutes after 10 and I'm going to try and knit some stuff together and it is almost certainly not going to work, so bear with me. We're going to be talking about Christianity a little later in the programme, and during that news bulletin there I had an attack of what can only really be described as Catholic guilt, or possibly a sort of attack of the Protestant work ethic, which would be odd given that I wasn't raised as a Protestant. But I think we should talk about China, and I didn't put it in front of you first up this morning because it feels like quite hard work, and if I'm really honest, because I don't know as much about it as I should. I'm familiar with the totalitarian nature of the Chinese government. I am familiar and disgusted by their treatment of Uyghur Muslims. And I am conscious of threats and fears that their surveilling or surveillance of foreign countries, in this context most notably ours, is pretty close to the real life depiction of the dystopias that we all read about when we were growing up. But when it comes to the question of whether or not James Cleverly should be cozying up to China, I'm not really sure what to think. I think that, I'll tell you what my problem is. I think my problem is that I want to reach for the argument that, oh, we don't live in an ideal world. But then I realise that the more you reach for that argument, the less likely it is you will ever move towards a better world. So the other story in the news today, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a fellow in Saudi Arabia who is facing execution for his activity on social media. I think that there's one member of the Saudi Arabian royal family who's quite a big shareholder in Twitter, or what used to be called Twitter, and it is his activity on that platform in part that has prompted his sentence. There's something so completely impenetrable about that scenario, so cyclical, so circular, that it actually chills me to the core. I actually don't want to think about it. How do you discuss that? This is a country where people are wanging on all the time about free speech in the context of transgender toilets, but you've got someone facing execution for his activity on a platform that is part owned by a member of the family that rules the country, where he's facing execution for his activity on that platform. How mad is that? It's almost as mad as the fact that when the Western world was going through its sort of state-sanctioned Islamophobia, the apotheosis of which, of course, was Donald Trump's so-called Muslim ban, Fox News' second biggest shareholder was also a member of the Saudi Arabian royal family. It's as if, and I hope this isn't overloading things for a Wednesday morning, it's as if the more you look at the real politic of international relations, the more you realise that there's no such thing as morality, for which I don't expect to win any prizes pointing that out, but there's not much logic either. Because if you were to say, well, there is some logic, we'll do businesses with countries like that, but not with countries like that, you can just point out that, well, there's no difference between that country and that country. And of course, Rishi Sunak has invited the prince, the Saudi Arabian royal, who is widely regarded as having ordered the murder of a journalist in Turkey, to come here for tea and cakes and the full red carpet treatment. Do you see what I mean about the more you dig into this sort of stuff, the more impenetrable and unpleasant it becomes? So what do? Do we dive into it wholesale? Do we do it all? Or do we just pick off one little element of it and look at that? I think we'll do the latter today. We'll just talk about China. There will be you listening to this now may know more about this than I do, but that's fine. I'm not going to be embarrassed or ashamed about my lack of understanding. I'm just going to address it and try and improve the situation. I've also got a bit of a problem with James Cleverly, which I'm not sure I've shared with you before. And my problem with James Cleverly is that against all my instincts and better judgment, I quite like him. I don't know, if you listen to the Full Disclosure interview series that we do, you'll know that a recurring theme for me is how close to the surface of the adult the child remains. Now, some people you cannot imagine as ever having been children, right? And some people you can't quite believe are actually adults because their outlook and their behaviour is still so childlike. And I have a soft spot for people whose inner child is near the surface. And Cleverly's always seemed like that to me. He's so desperate to please and so desperate to fit in and sort of... Unfortunately, he's chosen to hang out with a bunch of sociopaths and racists. But he's done all right. He's risen up to Foreign Secretary in successive cabinets, including Liz Truss's. And Liz Truss, of course, depicted China as a grave threat to this country. But he stayed on as Foreign Secretary when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, and now he's going to China to cosy up to the regime. So I know that you could portray that as utterly craven and sort of weather vane amorality, but I don't know. I think it's because I've met him. I told you a million times, try not to meet politicians. Socially, it's all right in a studio, but don't try not to meet. The last thing you want to be doing is breaking bread with politicians. I even sat next to Ian Duncan Smith at an awards ceremony once and found myself warming to elements of him. Before, obviously, I gave myself a slap around the face in the gents and a good stern talking to. Luckily, I spent most of that evening on the stage dishing out the awards, so I didn't have to talk to him much. But, you know, if you're a decent person, if you're a liberal and you generally try to see the good in everybody, very, very bad to sit down for dinner with Tories. It really is, because you end up indulging your own liberal instincts and trying to see the good in everybody, even people who spend their entire lives portraying the bad in everybody else and lying through their teeth about how awful everyone except their own support base is. I've gone off message a bit already, haven't I? So what's weird about this, of course, is that Truss wanted to designate China a threat. I know that she was only there for 13 minutes, but she did get as far as putting together a foreign policy and diplomatic strategy document, okay? And the phrase that was used to describe China in that document was threat. The Foreign Secretary at the time was James Cleverly. The Foreign Secretary at the moment is James Cleverly, and he's been quoted in the Financial Times as saying he would not conduct foreign policy by catchphrase. Catchphrase being threat, which is how foreign policy would have been conducted by the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly under the last Prime Minister, Liz Truss. So, I mean, he stayed in the job, swapped leaders, and completely swapped opinions to suit the new leaders. In this case, Rishi Sunak, who seems uncomfortably comfortable. That's quite a nice phrase. He seems uncomfortable or discomfortingly comfortable. That's better, isn't it? Discomfortingly comfortable with the worst leaders in the world. Just looking, as we've mentioned, at Saudi Arabia and China. I've done it now already. I'm going to be bombarded with reminders of all the other Tories that I said quite nice things about over the years, only to be proved horribly, horribly wrong about all of them. We could call it the Hancock factor, I think, couldn't we? I do suffer from a terrible strain of the Hancock factor, a previously unidentified strain of the Hancock factor, where your natural liberal tendencies lead you to see the good in everyone, or to try to see the good in everybody, and you end up making excuses or saying warm words about utterly reprehensible characters like, well, Hancock. I never had it for John. Well, I did briefly have it for Johnson as well in 2008, didn't I? It took me about 10 minutes to regret voting for him to be London mayor. But hey-ho, it's best to get it out there. Better out than in. Let's be honest about these things. So Cleverly is in the Chinese capital. Touchdown yesterday evening. So the first British Foreign Secretary to visit the country in half a decade. There are almost too many contentious issues to list in the context of Chinese domestic and international behaviour. There are sanctions currently in place on British MPs, including the aforementioned Ian Duncan Smith, who is one of the many politicians in James Cleverly's own party calling for a tougher stance from the UK government towards Beijing. He says the problem with our position right now is it smells terribly of appeasement. It's like we want more business, therefore God, man, you're doing it again, these bloody Brexiters. They turn us into an economic basket case and then complain when people like Cleverly turn up in Beijing with their begging bowl, desperate for the business that we need to replace the business that we lost when people like Ian Duncan Smith got their Brexit over the line. But you're not going to read that in 80% of the British media, even though it is the truth. He goes this far, Ian Duncan Smith. He says the problem we have got with that is it's redolent of the 1930s, when we just thought, just be nice to these people and complain occasionally, but don't do anything. This a reference to the Chamberlain government's attitude to Nazi Germany after, for example, the annexation of Sudetenland, and I think even after the invasion of Poland. Is there anyone else my age who can't hear the phrase invasion of Poland without thinking of Basil Fawlty? There's a mark there, isn't there, of just how under the surface, just how deep good comedy can go. It's ridiculous, really, that whenever I hear you invasion of Poland, I think of Basil Fawlty rather than Adolf Hitler. It's absolutely absurd, but we are where we are. So I think, oddly, we will do Duncan Smith versus Cleverly today. Two Tory politicians who both supported Brexit, both supported Boris Johnson, both proved repeatedly and horribly wrong about almost everything they've ever opined on, but not crucially everything. All right? It's dangerous. I don't think it's a second strain of the Hancock factor to point out that even the most reprehensible politicians in public life sometimes get something right. Even Nadine Dorries' resignation letter, for example, made some salient points about Rishi Sunak's premiership, although, of course, she lacked the wit to understand 99% of the reality that she sought to reflect. So, what do you think? I think there's a danger at the moment of forgetting the role of citizenhood. I was looking through the newspapers today, and it's pathetic to see what this country has been reduced to. I know I should probably broaden my horizons more, but unless you're reading the I newspaper or The Guardian, then basically you're being fed an unleavened diet of ULEZ, violence at the Notting Hill Carnival, claims about language and transgender issues. There was an astonishing story yesterday about a hospital. One newspaper was claiming that nurses and doctors were being told not to ask patients their name. If you read down even 4 paragraphs into that story, it told you, well, no one knows actually who's put these posters up. It's definitely got nothing to do with the hospital, and we think they might be based upon some online material that has been misquoted on the poster that a right-wing think tank has found. And yet they don't mention that when they're talking about it on the telly or going large in their columns. We've got a foreign secretary visiting a country that is posing an existential threat to the current world order, that is buying up huge swathes of Africa, because the thing about Chinese communism is it's not looking 10 minutes ahead like British politics does, or 10 years ahead like British politics could if it was a little bit more adult. It's looking centuries ahead. So the crucial thing about understanding Chinese communism is that they are making plans now for what the world will be like in 2, 3, 4, 500 years. And they will own most of it, because the aid and the support that they're giving to Africa and other third world countries is so off the charts that these countries are going to end up in hock to China, who will have a big enough army, of course, to enforce and call in all of these debts for generation after generation after generation. And James Cleverly is there with, I think we could loosely describe, a begging bowl. I've got rather more to say on this subject than I expected, but I'll try and keep it brief, because the thing that really makes my heart ache, actually, I'm not going to lie to you. I think this next period of British politics, I'm going to become unapologetically patriotic. I am sick to death of what they're doing to our country. Do you know there's a Daily Mail columnist today complaining about the state of the country, calling it third world? I saw another Daily Mail columnist yesterday saying, why is Britain broken? And you sit here, I mean, obviously in my case, having just written a book called How They Broke Britain, and both of the people I've just referred to are in it. How can anybody sit here, look at the state of our nation, having been in charge for 13 years, having had their own people, in the case of one of those Mail columnists, her own husband, in major roles in the country for the last 13 years, and they sit there wringing their hands and clutching their pearls and wondering, how did it all get so bad? It's absolutely incredible. And the reason my heart aches today, and the reason I need you to help me, is because I think Brexit has made James Cleverly's trip to China inevitable. And I don't know how to unravel that. I think if you close down business with your closest trading partner and your biggest trading partner, and you make it harder to trade with them, and you retain the ideology that that was a really clever thing to do, this is the crucial point. They had to admit yesterday that Brexit is going to put inflation up. It's not the cause of rising inflation, but it makes everything worse. It doesn't cause all problems. You show me a problem, Brexit makes it worse. I don't see what choice we have, not we, they. A government that still pretends Brexit was a good idea has to suck up to Saudi Arabia and has to suck up to China, doesn't it? 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. So if I can distill that down to 3 questions, I'd be amazed, but I'll try. The first question is, whose side are you on? And you've got to pick one, I'm afraid, on today's show. James Cleverly's or Ian Duncan Smith's. So should we be cozying up to China, or is it appeasement akin to Neville Chamberlain's attitude to Nazi Germany in the 1930s? 0345 6060 973. Question number 2. Essentially is about whether or not we are reduced to abandoning any semblance of a moral compass when it comes to foreign policy. But that's a bit wordy. So question number one, who's right, Cleverly or Duncan Smith? Okay, 0345 6060 973. Question number two, do you agree with my analysis, my fear, that Brexit means we've got to cozy up to the worst regimes in the world, even more than we did already? In this case, China, but tomorrow, Saudi Arabia. We have no choice. They have no choice. Something else they have done to us. By making our trade with France more complicated, they have to pretend that new deals with India or China are going to be manna from heaven. 0345 6060 973. And then the final question is really directed at you as an individual, as a citizen. And that is, how do you feel? If you're of Chinese heritage, that would be interesting. How do you feel about the British government now landing in the heart of a rogue nation, a nation that what does a Tory look like today? So you were cheering for Liz Truss, right? And she was calling China a threat and recalibrating foreign policy to recognise its dangerous role on the world stage. You literally press fast forward for 5 seconds. You've got a new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and he's sending the same Foreign Secretary to China to suck up to the leader of the country that the last Tory Prime Minister wanted to essentially put on the naughty step. And you're still cheering. You're pathetic. Sorry. I think it's time the gloves came off on this. If you're still cheering now when you were cheering the polar opposite 3 months ago, you're a joke. You're a walking joke. A walking voting joke. But here we are. Look what you've done to our country. Look what you've done to the rest of us. And look what we are doing today with regard to China. I'm 20 minutes in now. I'm going to stop talking. But I'm going to remind you that I admitted at the start I don't know quite as much about this as I should. I know a little bit more than I thought I did, as it turns out. But crucially, we're sucking up to China. We know what they do. We know what they are. We know who they are. We know how they treat dissidents. We know how they treat religious minorities. We know how they treat, you saw Tiananmen Square. We're sucking up to China. What do you make of that? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we chose this conversation. It's enormously important, and it's possibly part of the reason why right-wing newspapers are full of fluff and nonsense, or just barely veiled attempts to pretend that black people have criminality or violence in their DNA. It's pathetic, and we're actually being distracted or taking our eyes away from the big stories of the moment. In this case, James Cleverly in China sucking up to the Chinese regime, to Xi Jinping, within months of being Foreign Secretary under a Tory Prime Minister who insisted that China was a threat and should therefore be treated with extreme caution. Riddle me that. Gary's in Walthamstow. Gary, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. How are you?
I'm all right, mate. What's on your mind?
I was going to turn it off, but because it was too heavy for me.
Yeah, same here, actually, but I don't have that luxury, do I?
No. James, I'll tell you what this is a little bit like. I've got 2 kids, and they do pretty okay. And sometimes you have to explain to them, you know what, the world is a harsher place out there than what you're getting at home. You're getting a lot of benefits. And that's what we were. We were in a club where we were getting lots of benefits and lots of privileges and a joint power share. And we thought, you know what, we'll leave and we'll go off somewhere else and we do much better. And then we've suddenly looked back and realised, actually, that ship that we've just left, we're now in a dinghy behind it. And there are other big ships on the ocean that are buffeting us. And we need to attach ourselves to one
on everything from frictionless trade through to the imposition of international sanctions, being in a 600 million, 500 million strong gang versus being in a 50 to 60 million strong gang is obviously a completely different proposition. But this government can't admit that, though.
No, of course they can't, because they're not grown up. They're not mature. And unfortunately, it's both sides of the political spectrum. You know, we've got to look and say, you know, we've made a mistake. And this is not about being a Brexiteer or whatever. This is about the reality of people's lives for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years as to where this country is actually going to be going. And as you say, all these distractions about, for instance, the Notting Hill Carnival, 2 million people go to an event. There are a few incidents, and you're going to stick that on the front page.
They were horrible. They were horrible crimes, but per capita, they were more at Glastonbury.
It's not only that, James. How many crimes do we have at football every Saturday?
I don't know, but no one's trivialising violence, but obviously right-wing media is dedicated to portraying people of colour as having criminality in their DNA. They pretend otherwise, but on everything from stop and search right through to paying a lot more attention to the Notting Hill Carnival than they do to, there's a pub in Clapham where your chances of getting stabbed outside if you're gay are higher than they are anywhere else in the world at the moment. But they don't go on about that. You know why, I know why. But I want to steer you back. It's my fault for chucking that into the mixture.
Right.
So steer you back to China, because you can't. It's all very well saying we're going to have to recognise the mistake at some point. They're not. They're in charge. James Cleverly is in China. Is he right that it's a necessary move, or is Ian Duncan Smith right that it's Neville Chamberlain in the 21st century, or is the truth somewhere in between those two positions?
The truth, James, is somewhere in between those things. One of the things that I do for work is I procure certain things, and most of
I used to know a bloke like you when I was at college.
No, not that kind of
I beg your pardon.
One of the things you notice, and it's technology that we procure. The majority of it, in fact, almost all of it, is from China.
Well, that's a fascinating point. So how naive is it to suggest that we should be keeping China at arm's length?
It's going to be very difficult for us, for Europe, for even the United States to keep China at a distance, because we've given them the manufacturing base of the world. That's what we've done. We've handed it over to them. So in order to wean ourselves off, it would actually take years. And the thing is, we, the West, have been beating other countries with the big stick for the last 200-300 years.
And that world order is changing, and we're probably not ready for it. So Cleverly says to consciously withdraw and not utilise our standing in the world, the authority and voice that we have, that would be seen as a sign of weakness, not a sign of strength. Do you think he realises that the authority and voice that we have is a fraction of what it was in 2016 or not?
He absolutely knows that.
I think
what
he
he's
does
going to
as
do,
well.
he knows that, but he's got to pretend to the electorate.
I wonder whether Duncan Smith knows that. I mean, oddly, that's why it's quite interesting to set it up as a head-to-head, because Duncan Smith, even more of a kind of brain-boiled Brexiter, probably doesn't understand the damage that has been done to our international standing and our international authority. As one of the loudest voices in a gang of 600 million, you're going to garner a heck of a lot more attention than you are as a very quiet voice in a gang of 50 or 60 million. But Cleverly probably does know it, until you get to the bit where Duncan Smith says it's as if we're thinking, just be nice to these people and complain occasionally, but don't do anything. Gary, great stuff. Thank you. I'm glad you didn't turn off. Well, you might now. Graham's in Camden. Graham, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Thanks for taking my call. I'm a first-time caller, so this could end up as a complete shambles.
Don't worry, you're in good company, mate.
I'll do my best. Listen, I was reading as you started, just purely coincidentally, a piece in The Observer on Sunday by Simon Tisdall.
Yes.
And the headline was, China wants to erase Tibet. Will timid Britain stay quiet about this crime?
Yes.
And it was really interesting, because I'll only do 30 seconds of quoting him, because he puts it so much better than I can. And he talks about cleverly going to China because he claims the UK has, quotes, agency and can exert influence. And he says, I'm quoting him directly, this is delusional. The Chinese party behemoth, spying, bullying and picking up protesters in Manchester, torching the Hong Kong Joint Declaration, backing neo-fascist Vladimir Putin, besieging democratic Taiwan and plotting an authoritarian New World Order is simply not listening, especially now Europe, and Britain no longer speak as one.
That's brilliant.
So
that is absolutely on the money. So, I mean, it's not a great phone line, unfortunately, Graham, what with it being your debut and everything. But do you think Cleverly realises that?
Yeah, of course he does.
You're all being more cynical about.
Actually,
go on.
I don't know. So I may be giving him the benefit of greater intelligence than most politicians have.
Well, remember Brexit.
Possible that they're delusional enough to think they're important still,
yes,
and that actually, I've got a great big swinging whatever, and they will listen to me, whereas they haven't listened to other people. That's quite possible.
But that's Brexit. That mentality that you've just described is Brexit in a nutshell. It's nothing to do with our actual objective measures of our strength and influence. It's nothing to do with facts and evidence. We feel better. We feel superior, we feel powerful, ergo we are. And that's why they need us more than we need them. And that's why the German car industry, blah, 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 blah. So now he turns up in China thinking that he is actually I don't know, Graham. I think he might believe it. Actually.
I think he might too. I mean, it's one of the biggest. I remember at the time, apart from being desperate about Brexit going on the march and all of that stuff, the biggest loss to the UK was a voice in the world. I mean, I'm not suggesting that the economic disaster has been
easygoing,
acceptable, but the loss of our voice in the world and not being part of a European voice is tragic.
Why would anyone listen? Why would anyone listen? I don't think Duncan Smith realises that, and I don't know whether Cleverly realises that, and I wonder how many people who keep voting for these clowns realise that. Remember, everybody knew exactly what they were voting for. So, you know, when you voted to denude us on the international stage, to render us both a laughingstock and an economic basket case, you knew full well that it would end up with the Foreign Secretary 6 months after being part of a government that treated China as a threat and wanted to put it on the naughty step, turning up with his begging bowl in the middle of Beijing, claiming that he was he's there to teach the Chinese a lesson. Good God, they must be laughing, mustn't they? They must be laughing their heads off at us. James Cleverly's turned up to teach the Chinese a lesson. 0345 6060 973 to share your thoughts. But first, Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time. Two politicians who are not likely to win any popularity contests on this programme anytime soon, but if we were to hold one, I'd probably give the nod to James Cleverly, are in direct disagreement over the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly's trip to China. Ian Duncan Smith likens it to appeasement of Nazi Germany in the 1930s, while James Cleverly claims that we have sufficient authority and voice on the world stage that the Chinese government will sit up and take notice when he tells them to get their house in order with regard to, for example, human rights concerns in China itself, the beating up of protesters in Manchester by, of course, Chinese guards, torching the Hong Kong Joint Declaration, backing the neo-fascist Vladimir Putin, besieging democratic Taiwan, and plotting an authoritarian new world order, to quote from that splendid article in The Observer that Graham just brought to our attention. So who's right? Are we appeasing China? Are we appeasing Xi Jinping in the same way that Neville Chamberlain sought to appease Hitler? Or is James Cleverly doing God's work and laying down the law to the rogue regime in Beijing? 10:35 is the time. A quick visit to Idiot's Corner. And I mean, you get messages like this, and obviously it was during Brexit during Brexit conversations that I realised just how much gammon was situated between the ears of British men, in particular British people. So we've been talking about how the right-wing media is desperately filling its pages with nonsensical stories about everything from posters in hospitals through to ULEZ absolutely everywhere at the moment, and immigration or refugee-based rhetoric, while quietly cozying up to a regime that has got its eyes upon hundreds of years of world domination. And Steve pops in with this. How about talking about 405 immigrants being given student accommodation in Huddersfield? Bear in mind, I won't even tell you how he spells bear, students have already paid for those rooms. I dare you to mention this in today's or any programmes in the near future. Well, I've mentioned it, Steve, but only to highlight what a twerp you are, because to sit here and look at the world stage or the conversation that we're having, where a UK Foreign Secretary is sacrificing what little integrity we might have left by cozying up to the Chinese regime shortly before we invite the bone-sore Prince of Saudi Arabia to London with a red carpet welcome, and you are obsessing about 400 people getting accommodation in a town you've never visited. You're an absolute prat, but I thank you for reminding us of how effective this sort of just presume the worst of people, treat people like chuffing idiots, and people like Steve will always be there to prove that it can be a very effective tactic. 10:37 is the time. Suzanne is in Axmouth. In Axmouth or Exmouth?
No, we always do this. It's Axmouth.
Axmouth in Devon. My apologies, Suzanne.
No, because the axe is always at the end of the chopping down the tree.
It is. It's a river. It's a river. It's a river.
It's a very philosophical point.
Yes.
The axe comes on the tree.
Indeed. What made you pick up the phone today?
Well, James, I've been listening to you for a long time.
Sorry.
No, not sorry. I found you absolutely intriguing.
Okay, I'll take that.
Are you
cautiously.
Are you a supporter of Keir Starmer?
Well, in the context of the current political landscape and the options that are available, yes, I am.
Is that chutney?
Piccalilli.
Yeah, I would agree. Anyway, I've just got some points about Fergal Sharkey.
Right.
Bless his heart.
Yes.
Is really trying to actually campaign for the water board.
He is.
In the country.
I'm going to leave you to talk, and I'm confident that you are going to lead us from Fergal Sharkey to Xi Jinping. But some people listening will be a little sceptical about that already.
Anyway, I just want to make a point that,
yes.
Obviously, we've got to really look after the water that we have in our country.
Right.
I don't want to be radical. I just want to say clean water seems to be a really natural thing.
It does. But what's it got to do with China?
Well, China. I lived in China.
Oh.
Yeah. I lived in China, and I was there when Tiananmen Square happened. I was there. So it was 1989, 4th of June, I was there. I saw it happen. I was there. And it was pretty awful. So I've got my sort of, view.
Sure.
Of what happened.
Well, you've got a foreign secretary claiming that we need to be there to utilise our standing in the world and the authority and voice that we have. Barking mad. And then you've got...
No, this is my dog, bless her.
That's a
Daisy,
relief.
she's barking.
And then you've got Ian Duncan Smith comparing our trip to China.
God. I mean, Ian Duncan Smith is not worth a piece of paper.
Well, no, but he is actually he's probably right about this, isn't he?
He's not.
Okay.
What, he's not. Oh, sorry. Did I say something wrong? I mean,
no, not
Ian
at all.
Duncan Smith is just like.
But this is the problem
God,
this is the problem that we find ourselves in, is that we are reduced, Suzanne, as a nation now, to treating James Cleverly and Ian Duncan Smith as statesmen, thrashing out an issue of incredibly serious international foreign policy on the world stage. James Cleverly and Ian Duncan Smith. It's like sending Jimmy Cranky and Mr. Blobby to the United Nations, but that's what we're reduced to, and I insist that you pick a side. James Cleverly or Ian Duncan Smith?
No.
You have to.
I'd pick Mr. Blobby.
OK, that's a reasonable response to the question that was put before you. Suzanne, take care. Next time, I promise I'll get it right. Axmouth. Checker's in Milton Keynes. Checker, what would you like to say?
Hi, I took exception to what you said about China basically buying Africa up.
Okay.
And, there's a way you implied like Africans have no agency, and I find that particularly annoying.
Well, I'm afraid you've got completely the wrong end of the stick. You can't buy something unless someone's selling it.
Well, basically, a lot of Western commentary.
Yes, but we're not talking about a lot of Western commentary today. We're talking about what I said, and I didn't say what you heard.
Okay, maybe I'll grant that. But basically, I think that Cleverly is on the right track, given the hand that he's been dealt. However, yes, China is making advances in Africa.
About 1.2 billion acres worth of advances, I think, at the last count.
Yes, but then the question is...
So about 100, just for people in old money, that's 186,000 square miles or 465,000 square kilometres. About 7% of the total land area in Africa is owned lock, stock and barrel by the Chinese state. So what exactly was it you were objecting to about what I said?
I'm objecting to the fact that you made it seem like Africans have no agency.
No, I didn't.
You did.
How?
But that's how it came across.
Well, how? Tell me how I can avoid that in the future.
Basically, Africans are making choices, and a lot of the choices...
Yes, they've chosen to sell 7% of their total land area to China.
We have chosen to deal with the Chinese because the Chinese approach us with a lot more respect.
So what is it about my description of the situation that you have a problem with? 7% of the total land area in Africa is owned by China, and it was sold by Africa.
You talked about China planning for centuries.
Yes,
and
that is correct.
Have,
even the vaguest reading of Mao Zedong would teach you that.
I have read Mao Zedong.
Well, then you know that I'm right. So what are you complaining about?
I'm complaining about the fact that you made it appear, at least to my ears, my African ears, that we do not have any agency.
And which words was it that came
wrong.
out of my mouth that gave your ears that impression?
The words were something along the lines of, oh, the Chinese are buying up a lot of Africa.
7% of the total land area. So again, what words was it I said that reached your ears as denying African people agency?
That was it.
But that is physically and mathematically correct.
And it comes across like we just did it by force, because you did it.
Well, when you say we, how much of that 7% of the total land area in Africa were you personally responsible for selling?
None.
So what are you talking about?
I'm talking about the fact that African countries are making choices.
Yes, and the choices are to get into bed with China. So again, what did I say that you have a problem with?
And is that now getting into bed with China or getting into business with China, that's the way I would prefer to put it, is for our own profits or our own interests.
Well, precisely.
Exactly.
And that's why James Cleverly is in Beijing today as well, for hopefully his own profits and Britain's own interests in his mind.
Yes.
I think you've brought a grievance to the programme, Checker, that has actually not been fed by what you've heard on the show today. And I completely respect that. We've all woken up on the wrong side of the bed in the morning, but you have heard nothing coming out of my mouth that fits remotely the description that you have just offered.
I'll grant that, but good. I didn't bring any grievance.
Of course you did. You said that Africans were being accused of lacking agency. If that's not a grievance, then I'm a tomato.
Well, maybe you are, but I don't think you are.
Definitely not a tomato, Checker. I look forward to our next conversation. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:47 is the time. Something else that occurred to me, actually, talking to Checker a moment ago, is that one of the reasons why the door is wide open for China to march into Africa and dispense largesse in terms of desperately needed support and infrastructure is because of all the racists in the West, and notably in this country, who've spent the last 20 years railing against foreign aid. Why are we sending money there when there's people here that I never help? Is a popular refrain, although they never say the second bit out loud. Why are we sending money to Africa when there's people in our own country that need help? Brackets that I never, ever, ever support anybody giving, close bracket. So taking advantage again of domestic rhetoric on the world stage. And up pops James Cleverly claiming that we've got standing and authority in the world. It's a country that spends, I think now, the majority of its foreign aid budget on housing refugees in this country. 10:48 is the time. Suki is in Caterham. Suki, what would you like to say?
Okay, James.
Okay, well. Suki, bring it on.
First and foremost, your point about China and long-termism.
Yes.
I have a saying that I always say, the West is playing checkers or drafts, Russia is playing chess, and China is playing Go. If you know anything about board games, China, Go, infinite possibilities. Long-termism. Everything is always about the long term. I lived in China for a year back when the current Great Wall came down just after the Olympics in 2009, which basically meant that they were able to all of their issues with Uyghurs, with anybody who was, that's when it all started. Everybody thinks it started last week. No, it started a long time ago.
Of course, yes.
Long-termism. Next, financial support for African nations and for the Caribbean. That has been going on for the last 40 years. Mm-hmm. China has been investing in Africa, especially in the mining industry, which we are now all dependent on because of technology. So while we've been thinking, it's the end of the food chain, which is buying technology, supplying the world with our great devices, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the first fundamental issue of technology, which is the supply of mining, ores, lithium,
most obviously.
You name it.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, you name it. So that's where they have invested. In the Caribbean, they've invested in the infrastructure, especially in the Commonwealth countries, that the UK, sorry to offend all the people, as a British American, that the UK
abandoned.
went in, abandoned.
Yeah, you're not going
to
offend anybody because your Daily Mail Rupert Murdoch axis of commentators have been calling for years for us to stop spending money in countries that aren't the United Kingdom on the days when they're not insisting that we stop spending money in the United Kingdom under the guise of austerity. So I don't see how anyone can take offence at that depiction.
Exactly. But China has been reshaping the world. And we've seen that recently, especially with the recent BRICS summit.
Yes.
I mean, they've invited 9 other nations. Was it 9 or 7? I can't remember.
I think it was 7, but I'll double check. And that, of course, gives them, more heft on the world stage alongside Brazil, India and Russia. And including, Suki, that astonishing line. That truly astonishing line as a mark of how the world is changing. The line I took away from it, and Vladimir Putin could not attend because he would have been arrested for war crimes if he had. And this was at a summit widely regarded as having been a great success for the member states.
Exactly. And we won't even talk about the implications of how that flips the world, the axis of power.
Of course.
And I think people are so very small in their thinking. Everybody thinks so about just themselves in today's environment. Like, I understand. Yeah, everybody wants peace, love, and for their families to be secure. But if you are not looking beyond that, they don't realize the implications of generations to come.
Of course.
I mean, we're sitting here talking about, oh my gosh, the cost of food went up. Do you realize the cost of that supply chain is because of the implications of what we've done to the world?
And well, elements of it are, but of course you're right. The thing that you've brought to my attention is actually the elephant in the room here, which is that as the balance of power shifts, and our role diminishes, our status on the world stage diminishes. And I hope we find a reverse gear. I don't know what it would look like. I haven't got the first idea what it would look like. I know what it doesn't look like. But as our status diminishes, partly through the shifting world order and partly through our self-inflicted removal from a more powerful bloc, then this notion of choice diminishes as well, doesn't it? If China says if China says jump, the day upon which the United Kingdom responds by saying how high is probably a lot closer than people appreciate.
One of the other things, James, is the fact that just recently we had the intelligence paper come out, which was talking about how Chinese government was seeding university students, and that was less than a month ago. I was interviewed on the BBC about this less than a month ago.
Yeah.
And here we are going to China. I mean, what else? Are we just going to now have a Chinese football league because we have footballers going to Saudi too?
That'll happen. That'll happen. And not that long ago, didn't we remove Huawei from some national infrastructure projects because we didn't think we could trust them?
And we won't even talk about that.
No, well, I mean, I'm glad you can laugh. I think you have to laugh. It is actually surreal. There's increasingly every subject you turn to, every big subject you turn to, which is why people like Steve would rather be talking about a student hall of residence in Huddersfield. Every big subject you turn to is like it's like a building block or a Russian doll of ridiculousness. I'd forgotten about Huawei. So you've now got the foreign secretary of a country that banned, I think, a major Chinese company from contributing to infrastructure projects because we couldn't trust them, turning up in Beijing, essentially with his begging bowl out, pretending that he's there to give them a good ticking off about everything from Tibet to the Uyghurs, and no one's pointing out that they're members of the same government or the same governing party remains in charge. Suki, thank you. What a business, eh? Shane's in Leeds. Shane, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Shane.
I'm from a country with a significant Chinese diaspora.
Yes.
I'm not of Chinese heritage myself, but about half my family is, including my cousins. And I don't trust them. Chinese ladies, not my cousin.
I'm glad I don't know. I mean, I don't know your cousins, but they can't be. I'm sure they're not saintly, Shane.
Yeah. Well,
I bet they cheated at Monopoly, didn't they, when you were growing up?
We didn't play Monopoly.
No, carry on.
But anyway, I cleverly. Cleverly's not there appeasing them. Appeasing them would suggest that we have something to appease them with.
Yes, great point.
Chamberlain had the power Chamberlain had the power to split up Czechoslovakia. What's James Cleverly got?
Well, yeah, he had the power to go to war as well against them as well. He could have declared war on Germany in the 1930s. So,
well, indeed. The Chinese, he might think that he's telling the Chinese off. They'll listen to him. They'll pat him on the head and send him away, and ignore everything he says.
Of course they will.
This is a country that has persecuted British overseas citizens in Hong Kong. But then again, it's not the first time that the UK has cozied up to authoritarian regimes.
God no.
The number of Russian oligarchs that were in London, for example.
See, we keep saying Britain. We keep saying Britain, but really we're talking about the Tories.
Well, yes, and whilst Brexit has made things worse, it's not the cause of this.
No,
Britain has always sort of gone. British exceptionalism has, and probably nostalgia. Maybe
it is. Yes, it's a combination of both. No, it is. It's a sort of rose-tinted retrospection coupled with exceptionalism, and it creates this idea that that we are somehow better and the world will bend to our British will.
Yeah, the only thing Britain really has going for it now is it's got a veto at the UN. But
right, give it 10 minutes, they'll be calling for us to come out of the UN because of their refugee convention preventing us from deporting people to countries where refugees get shot.
Well, indeed, we're about to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights.
I don't think we are, but they keep calling for it. So, do you think? Final question: do you think James? If you said to James Cleverly, if you could give him a truth serum, which I suppose isn't beyond the realms of possibility while he's in Beijing, but if you could give him a truth serum and say, "What are you doing here?" What would he say?
I think he's out there with his begging bowl out, like you said.
So we just say we need investment. We need investment, even if it's coming from China.
From China, there are plenty of other places he could be going. Why? I know China is the second largest economy in the world, but why not? Japan, South Korea.
They'll be laughing at us at the moment because we've pulled ourselves out of the biggest trading bloc on the planet. Why on earth would you want to do business? Go on.
We have joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or whatever it's called nowadays.
Hey, woohoo! Thank you, Shane. Shane, before you go, give my love to your cousins, won't you?
I will do.
Thank you very much. It's coming up to 10:15. I squeeze in Scott, who's in Clydebank, but you'll have to be quick, which is a bit unfair given the conversation that we're having. Scott, what would you like to say?
I'll try and be very quick then. So effectively, both our positions are nothing more than smoke and mirrors. The IDS is saying that, we shouldn't do business with them, we shouldn't be going, blah, blah, blah. He was more than happy to do business with them. Cleverly's been over there saying we're trying to make relations with them and we need to keep them sweet. And he's just going there because we need their money. When I was quickly talking to your producer, the example that I gave was I work for a German IT company, and when you were talking about the influence they have in Africa, we recently had just under 20 million worth of contracts with banks in Africa.
Yeah.
In Germany, you need to run every contract through the German government, an agency called BAFA. BAFA came back and refused to process the contracts and said they weren't allowed to go through. The reason they gave was because they felt that China had undue influence in those banks.
Wow. So that's to the detriment of German commercial interests,
Absolutely.
but to the furtherance of the national interest, if you like.
Yeah, long term,
or the European interest.
Yeah, long term they didn't want.
So we're the polar, and Germany's economy is in a worse state than ours at the moment. But the priority there on foreign policy is protection of values, if you like.
Yeah,
versus profit. So we're the polar opposite then. We're the polar opposite.
Absolutely, because we need the money. We don't have the influence, and we know we don't have the influence. Cleverly's basically over there doing the school equivalent of buying the bullies lunch before they take his lunch money.
That's a great way of putting it. But with a side order of going into business on the bully's behalf, moving forward. I hadn't thought of it like that, and I didn't know that about BAFA, about the German state having a kind of moral isn't the right word, but a national interest or a European interest-driven element of its commercial policy, of its international business policy. So you'd said that I don't want you doing business with these banks because that involves getting into bed with China with your eyes closed. And James Cleverly's there with his eyes wide open. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 11, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I'm going to go in on a slightly unexpected story next. Unexpected in both senses of the word. Describe something that I wasn't expecting to happen, and you're probably not expecting me to be talking about it. It came up a bit yesterday, didn't it? I can't remember why, but Andrew Windsor, the artist formerly known as Prince, his apparent rehabilitation by the royal family, I cannot help but see it in contrast to the treatment of his nephew, the war hero Prince Harry. Obviously going a bit tabloid there. Andrew Windsor, the artist formerly known as Prince, also, of course, did active service, in this case in the Falkland Islands. But, I mean, there was a story about 10 days ago, actually less than that, about a week ago, about him launching a bid to win back his £3 million a year taxpayer-funded armed security detail. Do you remember why he came up on yesterday's programme? It was because we were having a conversation about mummy's boys in regard to the head of the Spanish FA's mum going on hunger strike because people are criticising her son for grabbing a woman, clamping her head in his hands and kissing her uninvited on the lips. He, of course, is, in the eyes of his mother, the real victim in this piece. And we were just, if you missed yesterday's show, sort of marvelling, really, at the depths to which mother love can go in defence of their little kings and their little emperors. And I dropped a bit of a clanger, didn't I? I made a boo-boo. I got it horribly wrong, because loads of you texted me the words Prince Andrew, or Andrew Windsor, the artist formerly known as Prince. And I objected to that out of a sort of slightly oldie-worldy fealty to the late Queen. I felt that we were somehow maligning her memory by accusing her of being an overindulgent mother when she spent £12 million keeping her son out of court, where he would have faced charges of multiple sexual assaults. And I don't know why. It was a sort of curious sense of loyalty, if that's the right, I don't know. And then the more you criticise me for it, the more I realise you were right and I was wrong. I mean, it is a classic example of an overindulgent mother not being able to see her son as having done anything wrong, up to the point where it cost her £12 million. Now, I'm fairly confident the late Queen could afford it, but I think the point stands. If you are spending £12 million to keep yourself out of the dock, there must be a fairly compelling reason why you really, really, really don't want to be in that dock. And luckily, your mum's got a fat enough chequebook to keep you out of it. So that is why Andrew Windsor, the artist formerly known as Prince, found himself in relative disgrace not long ago. It's why he was essentially relieved of his role in public life. And then you fast forward to the coronation of his brother. And the astonishing, I mean, just think about this for a minute. However much you've had your brain boiled by tabloid coverage of Prince Harry and his wife, all right, or however much you are honest enough to admit you hate the fact that he's married a mixed-race woman, but I just imagine somebody who is out of favour with the royal family because of a sex assault case and a £12 million payoff, and then a member of the same family who is out of favour because he refuses to toe the line or dance to the tabloid's tune. And then reflect for a moment on living in a country where the majority of the media sort of treats them as equals. They're both the black sheep. They're both in isolation. So you've got one man standing up for what he believes to be right and standing up for his wife. Now, whether you agree that he's right or not doesn't matter. That is what he's doing. He is standing up for what he believes to be right and standing up for his wife, who he believes to have been treated abominably, not just by the British media, but also by his own family, who are so terrified of the British media that they wouldn't say boo to a Murdoch goose. And then on the other hand, you've got a pudding of a man, a bread pudding in human form, accused of multiple sexual assaults against a woman who brought a civil case, A man who we know was knocking around with Jeffrey Epstein, a paedophile people trafficker, long after Epstein's crimes had seen him hauled before a court. A man who we know took Jeffrey Epstein to the Queen's favourite house, Balmoral, and photographed him and his partner in crime, Ghislaine Maxwell, on the steps, on a bench that the Queen had famously been photographed in herself. So this milk pudding of a man, this friend of paedophiles, who stayed out of a dock by dint of paying 12 million quid of his mum's money to the woman that had accused him of multiple crimes, he is somehow the yin to Prince Harry's yang, as if the fact that neither of them were allowed to wear uniforms somehow spoke of comparable crimes or comparable offences. I remember watching that, and I enjoyed the coronation, and I've got no particular beef with elements of the royal family, but I remember watching that. I'm a fan of Prince Harry. So I watched that thing at Camp Bastion. I think it was at Camp Bastion, where he was giving an interview to camera, and the siren went off, and he just pulled off his microphone, he jumped up, and he ran towards towards trouble. I know he's in an Apache, or don't hit the deep, but I don't know why. I'm a bit of a sucker for that sort of thing. People running towards danger. It's why I'm a big supporter of the fire service, particularly when they're coming under attack from Tory politicians. Suella Braverman was at it only this week. People who run towards danger, they're not infallible. They've got flaws. They're like the rest of us. They've got failings, but they've got something inside them that most of us haven't got. And I just liked that. And if you told me, and then of course the image of him walking behind his mum's coffin, which he probably doesn't like people talking about. But my God, as someone who's benefited enormously from therapy and suffered a tiny fraction of the trauma that lad must have gone through, that image there, that little boy walking behind it, that coffin, which they made him do. Astonishing to think that when he turned up for his dad's coronation, he was reduced to the same status as his milk pudding uncle, the paedophile's friend. I'm truly breathtaking. But it gets worse. It gets worse. Because, well, not only is the disgraced artist formerly known as Prince trying to win back his £3 million a year taxpayer, you and me funded armed security detail, and not only did Priti Patel stick her not inconsiderable oar in by contacting Panjandrams at the palace on behalf of Andrew after apparently breaking bread with his PR advisor. Unbelievable, really. But we also know now that the royal family itself has embarked upon some form of rehabilitation, not of Prince Harry, whose crime was to stand up for himself and his wife, but of Prince Andrew, whose offence was to spend £12 million of his dead mum's money keeping himself out of a dock where a woman had accused him of multiple sexual offences. It's not Harry that they're trying to rehabilitate. It's not Harry that was sitting in the passenger seat of Prince William's car last weekend when they all drove to church in Scotland. It was the other one. And I can't get my head around it. I truly can't. Marina Hyde, without whom I think many of us would probably have gone mad over the last few years. Marina Hyde writes in The Guardian today with characteristic brilliance about the sheer impenetrable awfulness of it all. She doesn't go in particularly heavy on Harry, although it's inevitable for me, or impossible for me, not to see them in relief to each other. But he's there, in the passenger seat. And first of all, as a feminist, I was pretty outraged that his wife, William's wife, was sitting in the back. Kate, Duchess of something or other, was sitting in the back of the car, while the paedophile's friend is sitting in the front. It's breathtaking, right? Do all fusses die down eventually, asks Marina in this morning's newspaper, permitting the fussy to return to life largely as they knew it, while the public scratches its head and tries to recall precisely which scandal, multi-million dollar out-of-court settlement, Pizza Express branch it remembers them from. Sheesh. Driven last weekend by Prince William to church near Balmoral, where the Windsors are currently all gathered with two notable exceptions. And, I mean, there it is, right? That's truly breathtaking, isn't it? This idea that now, it would seem, they are trying to just casually reinsert Andrew Windsor, the artist formerly known as Prince, into polite society, into respectable society. Truly breathtaking. And of course it takes you back to the image of Harry being sort of treated as some sort of equivalent to his disgraced uncle, and to the little boy walking behind the coffin, and to the abomination, the abominable abuse visited upon him by right-wing media, up to and including Jeremy Clarkson publishing his private fantasies about watching his wife, watching Meghan walk through the streets of the United Kingdom being pelted with manure while everybody shouted shame. I mean, the mornings where we sort of step back a bit from just how crackpot this country has become are the majority. But when you take your glasses off, when you really get stuck in, we're an absolute mess. I mean, these are the people that are the most fated and rewarded members of the UK media. The ones that have got some sort of weird old man obsession with Prince Harry's wife, to the point where they often seem to be talking or writing about nothing else. And yet when the paedophile's friend is driven to church by the future king, they haven't got a single syllable to say about it. I wonder whether you could explain that to an outsider. 0345 6060 973. Why is the future king driving his disgraced uncle to church while his brother remains in a form of exile? 0345 6060 973. It's perfectly possible, as quite a few of you are pointing out, that Harry wouldn't want to be welcomed back into the bosom of the family. We don't know. We'll never know. And there's certainly no notion of rehabilitation with Prince Harry. There's nothing to rehabilitate him for. He's done nothing wrong except stand up for what he believes to be right and for his wife. The list of what his uncle has done wrong is as long as your arm. And yet he's the one that the future king is driving to church on a Sunday morning. Do you know, in the next hour, we're likely to talk about the decline of Christianity in this country and the fact that for the first time in living memory, a majority of people living here do not describe themselves thus. I think that might be a large part of the reason. Closest most people get to church is pictures of the royal family attending mass. And a more, how could one put this politely, a more varied bunch of adulterers and breakers of commandments you are unlikely to find assembled in one place. It was human feces, was it, rather than manure? I can't remember. So just explain it to an outsider. Why is the paedophile's friend getting the glad hand from his royal family while Prince Harry is still in isolation? Or leave Harry out of it, if you prefer. What do you think about Andrew, the artist formerly known as Prince, being essentially eased back into public life by the future king of this country? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I mean, you may well know more about the royal family. Well, no, you don't know more about the royal family than I do. Nobody knows more or less about them. We all know exactly the same about the royal family. People who pop up on your telly claiming to be royal experts, they know exactly the same about the royal family that you do. Everything we know is massaged and released and carefully cultivated. It's a perfectly healthy process by which privacy is protected, and the price paid for that is some sort of form of access. But my goodness me, when you think about that lad in California, serving his country, risking his life, falling in love and being treated like public enemy number one as a consequence, and then you think about his uncle, who took Jeffrey Epstein to sit on the Queen's bench at Balmoral, and which one is the future king warming up to? Yeah, you got it. You got it in one. Just explain it to me. Have a crack at explaining it to me. I bet you can't, but you're going to have to try. Otherwise, we'll need to come up with another topic until 12 o'clock. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Is there anywhere else in public life that you could go from spending 12 million quid of your mum's money to stay out of court to sitting in the passenger seat of the future king's car? I don't know whether he waved at members of the public as he did so, but you wouldn't put it past him, would you? What does this tell you about A, modern Britain, 0345 6060 973, and B, the royal family? And I'll tell you what, while we're at it, why is no one else talking about this? Why aren't all the people who never shut up about Prince Harry or Meghan Markle talking about the fact that the paedophile's friend is sitting in the passenger seat of the future king's car? Anybody? Do you want to have a crack at that? Actually, it's a genuine question. I work in this industry. I don't know. I'd missed the story until Marina Hyde drew my attention to it yesterday. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Why is Prince Harry's perfectly peaceful existence in California somehow more controversial than the fact that his uncle, who spent 12 million quid staying out, keeping himself out of a sex assault trial, is being driven to church by the future king, whose wife gets demoted to the back seat? Explain that to me as if I was born in, I don't know, Timbuktu. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I'll tell you what, you get this one right, I'll give you the money myself.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11 is the time. I've got this weird thing, right, where, and it's the worst imaginable problem for someone who does what I do for a living to suffer from. But I've got this weird sense that sometimes comes into view or comes into reach mentally, intellectually, emotionally. And it's as if we're all lab rats and nothing actually matters. So, you know, like I slagging off Steve in the last hour for being obsessed with a hall of residence in a city he's never visited, and wondering why we weren't talking about that. Oh, there's going to be some immigrants living in it. Sorry, that's why Steve thinks it's really important. Wondering why we weren't talking about that instead of the Foreign Secretary being in China. And I suppose there might be days or indeed presenters who would prioritise a hall of residence in a town they've never been to over the role of Great Britain on the world stage because there's some immigrants involved. But I wonder whether we're all as daft as Steve in our own different ways. And in fact, sitting here wondering why Prince Andrew's sitting in the passenger seat of Prince William's car while Prince Harry is still persona non grata with his own family is just another example of the fact that we're all just audience. None of us are players. We're all just audience. They're the players. Took them 20 years to rehabilitate Camilla. You remember after Diana died? Absolutely no chance of that. There you go. Keep the papers sweet. They'll do what we want. We'll do what they want. And Harry said, I'm not having any of that. But because Andrew plays the game, there he is, being driven to church by the future king. Riddle me that. Imi Salua is in Fulham. Hello.
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well. How are you?
Good. Good to talk to you again.
Likewise. Where are you coming at this one from?
James, I'm confused as to why you're confused.
I'm confused as to why you're confused that I'm confused.
Yeah. So, I would have thought that this is quite a simple one. I don't think there's much to really think about. I think it's quite obvious that the royal family isn't really willing to take the heat it would have to take if it was going to bring back Harry and Meghan, number one.
No, that side of it I can see, but not the other side of it. What's he doing in the passenger seat? He should be bouncing to church on a pogo stick.
Yeah, but it's literally the exact same conclusion you came to yesterday when talking about the mother of the Spanish Federation president who's gone on strike. It's exactly the same thing. It's the mollycoddling. It's the, he didn't mean it. He just got in with the wrong crowd. If he hadn't just met him and been so enamored with him.
You know what he's like. He's always enthralled to people, throwing the cash around, silly old sausage.
And, Epstein was just so charismatic and there was nothing that he could have done. And when it really did come to it, he did fly to New York telling me they didn't want to be friends anymore. So, we should all put this to bed now. And, we're 12
Are we all guilty of this?
What, of excusing things that are...
People, if we love someone, we'll excuse almost anything.
I mean, there's almost anything, and there's
paying £12 million to a woman who's accused you of multiple sexual assaults in order to stay out of court.
Yes. I think there are levels.
Well, you heard yesterday, we took one call from someone whose mother, the mother of a murderer who blamed the victim. So you can, there is a argument, but that's mums, and we think of mother love as being a peculiarly intoxicating emotion, don't we? This isn't. This is nephew. This is nephew and brother. This is King Charles, because there's no earthly way William would have been able to drive Andrew to church without King Charles's permission. This is private versus public for me, actually. I think it is more nuanced than you allow. So in private, they might all be behaving as if nothing's happened, but why do they have to restore or seek to restore or rehabilitate his public standing? And crucially, why does the public not object?
I mean, this is going to sound really horrible,
Well, be
but I
careful.
genuinely think some people have gotten to the point where they just don't care.
Mm.
You know when so many bad things happen one after another, that if you
Yes.
actually continue to care about the bad things on the same level as the first bad thing, you'd have no bandwidth left.
This is Steve
Different
Bannon's.
levels.
This is the sort of emotional equivalent of Steve Bannon flooding the zone with bleep in order to make sure that nothing Donald Trump does matters anymore, because there's just so much you can't keep track.
Exactly. So if you were to continue to care about, the same out rule we have for the Spanish Federation president is because that was a brand new thing
Yeah.
that marred a really important event for women's football, right?
Yeah.
So that's one event that happens from one thing. But we were angry when it came out that Prince Andrew had a relationship with Epstein.
Yes.
Then we were angry about the depth of the relationship. Then we were angry about the interview. Then we were angry about the money. You can't.
And we were angry. We were angry about. I think you've alluded to this already. The failure to cut all links with him, or completely after he was convicted. His first conviction.
So you can't be angry about all those things, in addition to all the other things that are going on in people's lives. And to be quite honest, the media has made it very clear that, like you said, they're comparable. They're two things that Harry and the Duke of York are comparable. You can look at the two and say, they think they've both been kicked out.
Yeah.
The reasons behind them are kind of irrelevant. But if you've been taken in by what right-wing media has said, in your head, all you think about is, actually, they're bringing him back into the fold. And to some extent, family is more important than everything. And if there's one thing right-wing people love to say, it's family is more important. Family, 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 family.
Well, what about Virginia Giuffre's family?
What about, that's not a family that they have to think about or consider. It's not a family that they're really connected to. It's not a family they see often, or it's not a family they hold in their hearts.
I mean, you're obviously right, but I don't think we're filling the space. Because they don't have to do this. They could still be getting it. Could still be put back on the Secret Santa list at Christmas. But William drove him to church. That is William saying, "Oh, come on, give Uncle Andy a break now."
Okay.
But don't mention my brother, that scumbag.
Okay, James, I'm not going to say the B word, but I'm going to allude to it.
Well, I'm going to give you a round of applause if you bring Brexit into this one. Presuming
No.
not that B word.
My point is, why have we gotten to a point where people are still saying, no, it's good, no, it's fine?
Oh, you mean
no,
utter delusion, delusional,
Exactly.
Nadine Dorries levels of delusion. The country has been caught up in a Nadine Dorries level of delusion regarding many men.
But hold on. If you think the reality of the situation is so bad that you're not even willing to consider what it actually is, you'll believe the delusion. Because actually, the truth is a lot worse. The truth then means a member of the royal family, a family we're all supposed to hold in esteem, these amazing people and all this kind of stuff, the pinnacle of British society, one of them actually was friends with a paedophile and may have been involved in it himself. That is what people refuse to believe.
They can't go there. Can't go there.
Exactly. You can't go there when you're right. So then when you see a picture like the one that was photographed, also, that was so staged. Kate should have been in the front. I don't know why she was in the back, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
There's
some suggestions coming in as to why that may have been, which I couldn't possibly read out on the programme. I'll leave you and others. I don't think you need to, but I'll leave others to speculate on what that might involve. Woof, Emish Yulua, thank you. Always a pleasure. No, don't talk as often as we used to, but whenever we do, you prompt a flurry of praise. For example, this lady is good. I couldn't agree more. It's coming up to 11:30. The question remains, and some of it has been dealt with, but not all of it. I mean, the William angle. There you go. Let's do it. That you're a big fan. You're Team Wills, yeah. Team Wills and Kate. Down with the other lot. What's he playing at? Your uncle, right? Got himself off a triple sexual assault charges, albeit in a civil court, by spending millions of pounds of your grandma's money. What are you going to do? You're going to drive him to church, or are you going to tell him to walk? Yeah, I thought so. So what's William playing at? 0345 6060 973. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
11:32 is the time, or 11:33 actually, if you want to be pedantic about it. And the question under consideration is one that I haven't seen anywhere else in the media. In fact, I was even unaware of elements of the story. I didn't buy papers at the weekend. But the attempted rehabilitation of Andrew, who I am being ordered to stop referring to as the artist formerly known as Prince. And I fully accept that. Emma even had to pull over. How do I know that? She told me. She said, James, I've had to pull over just to beseech you not to refer to Andrew Windsor as the artist formerly known as Prince. I've been a Prince Rogers Nelson superfan for 40 years. He's seen me through the best and worst times of my life. A multi-talented musician, a feminist icon, a Black Lives Matters campaigner, generous philanthropist. He should never be mentioned in the same breath as that. I can't read out all of that, Emma, unfortunately. Other than that, I love you and love the show. And this one as well. Can you please stop calling Andrew the artist formerly known as Prince? Andrew isn't an artist in any way, and it's not fair on Prince to be associated with the paedophile's friend. You know what? You're right. And it's a shame because it's quite a pithy little description, isn't it? Because he is, a prince. That's why it's really good. I thought it was really good. But you're right, because that is the phrase. Taff cap is the phrase routinely associated with Prince Rogers Nelson, and therefore I'll stop doing it. And if I slip back, then give me another slap, Emma and others, and I will stop doing it. So we'll just call him Andrew Windsor from now on, and of course the paedophile's friend. Sarah is in Bury St Edmunds. I was just thinking about the seating in the car, and presumably he's sitting in the front seat because they wanted photographs.
Maybe.
Sorry, you weren't expecting that, were you, Sarah? I thought we'd just pick up the conversation where we left off. I don't know. That must be part of. They know the score. You stick in the person in the front seat. He's going to be the one in the newspapers the next day. Anyway, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, my theory is the difference is not because of what they did or didn't do or how bad what they didn't do or do was. It's basically that Harry has broken the family code and Andrew hasn't.
That's weird. That's some code, isn't it? Go on.
It was a bit like the mafia, I think.
Yes.
When you're in that family, you cannot talk to the press. You have to certain ways. You can't talk. You can't. You've got to kind of follow the family code, which, as far as I can see, is protect William, and then the second in line tends to be the one that they leak stories out.
Leave him alone, and we'll give you some dirt on the other one.
Yes, correct, and that's done in little increments.
Well, go after his wife, fill your boots, write what you want about his wife.
Correct.
That'll sell papers, but leave him out of it. Leave him alone.
Yeah.
That's Harry's accusation, isn't it? I think that is part of his thesis.
And I think, that's why Andrew can be rehabilitated, because he didn't break the family code. He, basically Harry, I guess by writing his book and putting everything out there, he stopped them having any ammunition against him. And I think that's the main problem. But I think the thing is, basically, Andrew kept the code. He didn't say anything to the press. Doesn't matter what he's done, because he's kept the code.
And that actually speaks. I didn't think I'd be saying this at 11:36 today, but that speaks to the conversation we had in the last hour about Chinese communism. You may not realise this yet, Sarah, but I'm pretty sure it does, because they're thinking about the next Harry, and they're thinking about the great. So if you are born into this family, then the only rules that matter are our rules.
Yes.
And Harry broke our rules. Andrew didn't. Yes. Therefore, there is a way back for him, which means that their great-great-great-grandchildren will, the precedent is upheld, isn't it? That the rules you can't break are the rules of, what do the mafia call it? Omerta, I think. The rules of omerta. And so you can pay £12 million of your mum's money to a woman who has accused you of 3 separate sexual assaults and not break the family code. But if you call out your family for colluding with the media in attacks upon your wife, then you're toast.
Correct. That's exactly how I see it. I think it's terrible.
Well, then I must invite you to answer the next question, which is how or why does the British public go along with this level of moral corruption?
Because I just think that they swept along by ceremony and, like you say, doff your cap. I think it's very, very sad that the media dictates how people think or don't think, and I think we've lost a lot of our integrity and honour.
Or if we ever had it, but just that sense that although we may have furiously disagreed with each other, we at least agreed upon what the rules of engagement were. We all played on the same pitch and reacted to the same referee's whistle, whereas I would track it back to 2016, obviously, when reality quit the building and many people claimed that the fantasies that they had fallen for or helped to sell were the new reality, and all bets were off. I think you see it here, times it by 5 in America still, where you've got people queuing up to claim that Donald Trump's completely warped worldview is somehow accurate and fair. Thank you, Sarah. Do you know what? There might be something in that. There might be something in that. That idea that there's a code. It's like a mafia code, and if you don't break the code, you're fine. We'll look after you. But if you break the code, you're toast. 11:38 is the time. So Harry is sleeping with the fishes. Jack's in Bedford. Jack, what would you like to say?
I think my point that I want to make is the difference between Harry and Prince Andrew is, I think, from how I understand it, Harry chose to leave, take his wife and family to California, like you said earlier, to protect her and to protect them and take them away. So I don't think that he's not being invited or not being included. I think he's chosen to take himself away. And then on the Prince Andrew side, I think and I personally don't think he's done anything wrong. So he's not taking himself away, and he's trying to push himself back in because what he thinks he has or hasn't done is very minor. So I don't think that calling him the friend of a paedophile and condemning him for being friends with a paedophile, I think is unfair, because there are so many people that have friends that have done awful things.
No, but he
that's not his
he stayed
fault.
mates afterwards, after he'd come out of jail.
What I was saying to the lady before I spoke to you is, you don't know what conversations are being had or have been had behind closed doors. You don't know what Prince Andrew said to Jeffrey Epstein behind closed doors. You don't know if they were being best friends or whether they actually went there and said, you know what, this is awful, I can't believe you've done this, and all the rest of it.
No, you're right.
You're
right. No, you got me bang to rights, Jack. It's perfectly possible he flew all the way to New York after his mate had got out of jail to say, gosh, I can't believe what a wrong 'un you are.
No, but you
mean all those teenage girls that were hanging around at your private island? You mean that some of them were there and they didn't want to? I had absolutely no idea, Jeffrey. Look at the embarrassment you've caused me. Shame on you and your international sex trafficking paedophile ways. You're right, Jack. It could easily have been that conversation he flew out to have.
But I think you don't know that.
I'm agreeing with you, mate. It could absolutely, he could have flown all the way to New York to say, all those girls that were knocking around who I asked you whether they were underage and you assured me that they weren't, and they were all there entirely of their own volition. God, the embarrassment, you disgusting man. Shame on you for offering me massages with them and taking my photograph with my arms around. Shame on you, Jeffrey Epstein, for your disgusting behaviour. You're right, mate.
I think what we understand about Jeffrey Epstein is he was a master groomer, manipulator, and horrible person.
You don't know that. You don't know what conversations he had in private. He might have been a lovely guy.
No,
sorry, I'm just deploying your own logic. I'm just deploying your own logic here, Jack.
But just to go back on what you just said then, we know that's not true because we know what the crimes he was convicted of and the things that we know he did.
How do we know that? How do we know that?
Because we know.
How?
We know that is fact.
Yeah, because he went to court and faced the accusations. But so now, off the top of your head, who didn't?
Andrew never did.
Exactly. How did he avoid it?
Well, by doing what everyone else would have done in that situation.
So you, innocent of sexual assault allegations, would pay off the accuser rather than have your day in court and prove your innocence?
If I...
It's a simple question, Jack.
I wouldn't, because I don't have that kind of money.
It's all right. She's going to take 50 quid, mate. Are you going to pay her off, or are you going to have your day in court?
If she's going to take 50 quid for a sexual assault, then I would imagine that there's something deeper going on there than... If you're so traumatised and upset and you're willing to be paid off and not actually go through the process to get the person that you're accusing of doing something awful... £12 million.
You realise that you are essentially acting here as an apologist for someone accused of sexual assault?
No.
No, you are. That's not an opinion. That's just counting. Here's the man accused of sexual assault, and here's Jack in Bedford defending him.
I'm not defending him per se.
You totally are.
I just think that you can't... I think you have to...
Go on.
The court public opinion is can be... I don't know what the right word to use is, but...
You're telling me.
I don't know how to word it in a way. Judging someone...
Do you know why you can't word it?
Why is that?
Because your thoughts don't make sense.
Okay.
And your thought is, Prince Harry brought this on himself by sticking up for himself and his wife, whereas Prince Andrew is an innocent victim of circumstances conspiring against him. And that's why you can't say it in words, because if you did, you'd realise how ridiculous you are.
No, but I don't think what is being done to Harry is fair to him.
No, but he brought it on himself.
No, I don't think he brought it on. I don't.
But that's literally what you said when you rang in. That was your first point.
No. Yeah, he
chose to leave the royal family.
Yeah, he did choose to do that.
Yeah.
But I don't think that that was a bad thing to do. I think he's done that for, like you said earlier, to protect him and his family and his wife.
As opposed to paying £12 million to keep yourself out of the dock where you're accused of multiple sexual assaults. And yet here you are siding with the latter against the former.
I don't think that is necessarily the right thing. I don't think necessarily Prince Andrew should have done. I think he should have just stood up and defended himself.
Well, that's changed in the last 30 seconds. That's changed in the last 30. You said literally 2 minutes ago he did what everybody else would have done in that situation. Scale of 1 to 10, how do you think this call's gone for you?
Probably not very well.
Well, what?
Quite high up on, well, probably 10 if 10's bad.
Pretty close to 10. I'll give you 9.5, Jack, because it's not lunchtime yet, and you might have
But I want to make it very
low blood
clear
sugar
that
levels. No, mate, you've had your fun.
No. Just in my own defence. I'm just trying to put forward for my own defence that I'm just trying to make the point of someone else.
Okay.
I'm not saying that necessarily. This is 100% my opinion. But
good. Well, next time, don't ring in with anybody else's opinion but your own. All right. Otherwise, people might get confused.
Oh.
Have a great day.
That's fine. Okay. Goodbye.
11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12 minutes to 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's just bonkers, isn't it? And with respect to Jack, he probably regretted ringing in. That wasn't abnormal. That is probably the position held by most people who haven't thought about this issue very much. Why is Prince Harry being treated like public enemy number one while his uncle, the paedophile's friend, is being driven to church by the future king? Answer, it's just mad, James. But I can't say that because doff cap tug forelock, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. So I'm going to have to come up with some reason why this isn't just utterly bonkers. Utterly bonkers. And deeply, deeply wrong. But I can't come up with anything. So I should probably just stay quiet. Bill's in Wandsworth. Bill, what would you like to say?
Well, firstly, thanks for a very entertaining show.
Thank you. It's slightly patronising, but I do my best, Bill.
It is very...
thank you.
Thank you. Great to hear you on form. I think this emphasises more than anything the difference between the royal family and the commoners, such as we are. Their moral framework is so different from us. We would see, that someone like Andrew, who's actually paid a huge amount of money so that he can't be cross-examined and challenged because his kind of defence is so weak.
Well, we don't know that, but I mean, we can only speculate upon his reasons for not demanding his day in court to clear his name.
What one could say that, yeah. And he's seen by them as not committing such a great transgression as Harry, who ultimately has left the fold, and that is seen by them.
He's proved that you can. He's proved that you can. I still think that's an underestimated element of the whole saga, and it's what the more status obsessed and sycophantic you are. I'm thinking about people in my profession. The more outraged you are by the idea that someone can just cock a snook at the whole shebang. Just to say, no, I'm just opting out completely. I know he's hung on to a lot of the trappings of power. He's a far from perfect individual. He's not gone to live up a mountain and dress in sackcloth and ashes. But if your whole life is based on clawing up the ladder, clawing up the hierarchy, then for someone born at the top of it to turn around and just go, that is really hard to process, I think, subconsciously even. And that explains a lot of the anger that he prompts from all quarters or many quarters.
Yeah. I agree, but I think the reason, the big thing here is how Andrew is seemingly being rehabilitated.
Yeah.
And I kind of think there was a big assumption from a lot of us. I don't take much interest in these things, but I always imagined that Andrew was kind of like the embarrassing uncle who couldn't quite be shoved out the door, so he was just kept in the background. But the fact that he's being brought forward like this is indicative of all along they probably thought it's not that bad what he's done.
Well, I think he was the late
also
Queen's
at the time,
favourite. It certainly was. It was often reported, although again, who the heck knows, that he was certainly indulged by the late Queen, and he is supposed to be ridiculously spoilt. And
oh well. I do know someone who had an interaction with him, and he said he acted like a 5-year-old. He couldn't get his own way, and I think it just underlines for me quite how antiquated and different their whole worldview is from those of us who are grounded.
But it has to be. I keep thinking of. I mean, I've already mentioned the Chinese Communist Party, but I keep thinking of aristocrats planting trees. It's one of my pet subjects, Bill. If you want to, because you talked about at the beginning the difference between the royal family and plebs like us, and one of the key differences between the ruling class and plebs like us is heredity. The notion that if I own a stately home, I thought about this when I was at a stately home in Norfolk admiring the view, and I thought someone planted those trees perfectly 200 years ago, perfectly for how they look now. And we never think like that. You and I never do anything with our eye on a 200-year away horizon, but what they do, I guess they can never have a member of the royal family. You either chuck him out completely, like Edward VIII, or you, like the Duke of Windsor, or you kind of eventually have to bring them back into the fold because they have to be somehow other. They have to be not like the rest of us. They can't. The more like the rest of us they look, the more ridiculous the whole setup becomes.
So in a way, what you're saying is, if Andrew wants to stay in the fold, they've got no choice but to keep him there, in a way.
Yeah.
To maintain that, And this is the way they do it.
They can't stop him. I mean, what are they going to do? Have guards at the church door? So you can't come in, mate. No way. And so that is why then Charles, I'm speculating entirely, just like anybody you see on your television claiming to be a royal expert, Charles then says, well, look, if he's not going to go away, we can't look weak. We've got to look like we want him here. So, William, you drive him to church. I'm not driving him to church, Papa. No, you are. You're driving him to church. Crikey. All right, well, I'm taking Kate with me. Well, I'm sitting in the back. I mean, what else? How else do you explain? I mean, there's no more flattering analysis, is there, or interpretation? Bill, thank you. Kelly's in Brighton. Kelly, what would you like to say?
Hello, Brian.
Hello,
Kelly. Sorry, James.
No, that's all right. Brian works.
Sorry about that. Right, so no one's actually realised, or maybe someone hasn't called in, the psychological angle. I actually disagree with what the last caller is saying, that because they're royalty, they can get away with certain things. This is called a narcissistic household, and this commonly happens in many families, so it's very common anyway. Only with them, we can see it. Most people can't see it in their household. Unfortunately, Harry's the truth teller. He's the one that says it as it is, so he's the scapegoat. If what's his name? Andrew.
Brian.
Is seen as, if Andrew is seen as doing something bad, then obviously, oh my God, no, Harry is not doing anything bad now. Oh God, no, that can't be. So they're going to excuse everybody else because then it turns the attention negatively.
You can't sustain the idea that Harry has done something awful unless you simultaneously pretend that the bloke who's still getting driven to church by Harry's brother has not done anything bad at all, or anything like as awful as just sticking up for your wife and telling the British media to stick it.
In a psychological aspect, they do that as a confirmation bias. So, for example, no, it was okay. They're just starting on him. It's just the problem they have with Andrew. But Harry, oh my God, no, Harry, what he did was just off the wall. Like, that's basically how it works. Their minds don't work like everybody else. You have to pick on somebody. It's a bully type family, basically.
I guess so. Or, I mean, I understand the psychological analysis. It's just sort of weapons grade hierarchy, really, isn't it? It's. I don't know if there are any actual narcissists. I don't think there are, probably, but it's almost like the institution has the traits of narcissism because the hierarchy is so baked in. I can't imagine bossing my own sister around, let alone having to curtsy to her or bow or something like that. I mean, it's. Do you see what I mean? It's not in their DNA, oddly, whether they think it is or not, but it is drilled into them from such an early age. And the corollary of that is that if you play by the rules, you can stay on side, you can stay on the team. Our rules, not rules of law, not rules of morality, not rules of society or norms, but our rules. We are the firm. You play by our rules, you get our support.
Well, exactly. And since Harry's a truth teller, that he's never going to fit in, but he fits into the rest of society.
And blowing the way he fits in. Sort of, big fan. I make no apologies for that. Big admirer. Takes a tiny inkling of what it would take to stand up to the massed ranks of Murdoch and the Mail and the Telegraph and the rest of them. A tiny inkling, and yet he's done it. And of course, those court cases are still continuing as well. 11:57. Thank you, Kelly. Anthony's in Harrogate. Anthony, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James. Great to speak to you this morning. Yeah, first time caller. But yeah, I was just talking to your colleague earlier. I think the reason why we're talking about this today is that they've just gone too fast. You know, they've just gone too quickly with this rehabilitation. You know, why is Camilla now Queen? You know, instead of Charles's wife or Queen Consort.
That was the expected destination, wasn't it? 10, 15, certainly 20 years ago. It was. I mean, I think I remember reading she could never be Queen.
Totally. I mean, my dear departed mum, you know, turn of the century said, and she's very polite, and I won't repeat her words verbatim, but she said, you know, Charles has got another thing coming if he thinks he's putting that woman on the throne.
Yeah, I remember that. That attitude was common. Yeah, not common as in, unposh, but common as in widespread, wasn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, we've been gaslit incrementally, and they've just gone too quick, and that's why we're talking about this today. You know, this was always what they were. You mean
they've gone too quick on Andrew, whereas they should have played the long game like they did with Camilla, and that's something else that I think Harry has called out and explained that in return for slowly rehabilitating his stepmother, the press gets a kind of free pass on going after other members of the royal family with rather more alacrity than is fair.
Totally. I mean, Harry shone a light on this, and that's why he's been burned for it. That's why he's been totally ostracised. That's why he's, you know, been completely excluded. But yeah, it's what they've always done.
I've enjoyed this. Thank you, Anthony. I think this has been an oddly illuminating conversation this hour. I sort of feel a sense of perhaps a deeper understanding of some of the movements under discussion than I had before. I look forward to your next call, Anthony. I'm going to squeeze in Emma because she's in Derry, and I was listening to a beautiful song about Derry last night. Emma, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just want to say that I don't think it is rehabilitation. I think it's a case of, well, we're royal and we can do what we want. And if we want Andrew in this car, he's going to sit in this car. And William's either going to agree to it or, I mean, like, he has the choice to not agree to it. But what I can't understand...
I'm not sure he does. Well, I'm sure he does, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. But what I can't understand is, and I mean, like, they keep changing the goal, they keep moving the goalposts, restarting the start line, repositioning it. I mean, the media is basically telling people that you have to hate Harry and Meghan. I mean, I don't understand what Harry did. That is such a travesty. He didn't speak.
He fell in love, I think.
I think, and that's basically it. Because if you hear
sound like Matt Hancock now.
Different story. But
Sorry.
If you hear people chatting, they're always saying, "Well, we liked Harry this is the old Harry that we like," and they're always chatting about the Harry before Meghan.
Yes, of course they are.
And not only that, whenever they're reporting on Harry and Meghan, they're always having to quantify it. Well, they live in this house, and this is how much house this costs. But you don't hear, well, the King, he went to this charity event and he left his house.
No, 3 million quid a year Andrew wants us to pay for his security.
Yeah.
£3 million, and Harry offered to pay for his own and still got crucified for it. It is but there it is. I guess that's why they're not talking about it. Even the sort of people that are normally at the front of the queue abusing Meghan or waving their little polystyrene flags, they can't talk about this one because it is indefensible for now. There's a point Anthony and Harrogate made just before you, Emma. It's indefensible for now. They've gone too quickly. Just turn it down a bit, slow it down. Next time, stick him in the back. Don't stick him in the front, and then give it another year, and then in 5 years, and then in 10 years. It'll all be back to normal, and he can even have his uniform back. It's 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So, I mean, what would you put on the list of things that you know are my favourite subjects but aren't or weren't necessarily yours? Yeah, class is very near the top, isn't it? I have a sort of deep and abiding fascination with class because I've sort of moved across different class divisions in my life. I mean, the uppermost ones are always elusive. You can't get to them. You have to be born into them. But by dint of being adopted as well, plays a huge part in my understanding of socioeconomic status, and that there's always that idea of, who would you be if you had been. So that's why The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain is such a classic text, isn't it? Because who would you be? Had you been born on the other side of the street? Would you be the same person? Would you? Who knows? So class would be on the list. What else would we put? Obviously Brexit, but that's not unique to me or peculiar to me. Lots of people. In fact, if you're not absolutely fascinated by Brexit, then you are almost certainly either ignorant or in denial about what's been done to our country by some of the stupidest and most unpleasant politicians in the history of democracy. What else would you put on the list? Sort of stuff that we do quite a lot on the programme that other people possibly don't share our interest in. Don't say parking tickets or ULEZ. They would be the polar opposite of the kind of topics that I'm contemplating now. Religion, but religion in a kind of grown-up way. The fascination that I have with religion, again, largely because of my upbringing. And the similarities, of course, between all religions, notably the Abrahamic ones, Islam, Judaism and Christianity, which all grow from the same root, or however desperately sort of ignorant provocateurs may be to pretend otherwise. And the notion of this country being Christian, and the peculiar interest I have in particularly unpleasant politicians who claim to be Christian. It's an odd thing for a politician to do. There aren't really any Christians. If you meant by that somebody who lives entirely by the teachings of the Christ as detailed in the Gospels, you won't find any. I mean, you are a Christian if you try your hardest, obviously, but no one achieves it. You can't on earth. But the idea of particularly right-wing politicians claiming to be Christian is a fascinating phenomenon, because they vote constantly in the direct opposite way to what Christian teachings would demand. Whether you're talking about looking after the poor or refugees or whatever it may be, it's as if they've taken the Bible and decided to use their democratic powers in the House of Commons to do the polar opposite of whatever it was that Jesus would have required them to do. I go on about this so much, because it just amazed me. I think the older you get, the more amazed you are by things from your own childhood that you didn't notice at the time. So that blooming hymn that I go on about whenever we turn our attention to class matters, all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, da 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 da. And the verse that I don't think we sang it, we probably did sing it at school. I'm so old, we almost certainly sang it at school. The bit about the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly and ordered their estate. That, for me, is the absolute epitome of what I'm going to call English Christianity. So you take Jesus' teachings, which are unequivocal on wealth distribution and on inequality and on what is Caesar's and what is not. Take Jesus' teachings, right? And then somehow turn them into an endorsement of the idea that it is what God wanted for that fella there to be kipping in a castle while some poor soul is sleeping under cardboard boxes just outside. That is English Christianity in a nutshell, or at least class-based English, Anglo-Saxon, what would you call it? I don't know. Post-Reformation Christianity? You can't have that. The monks were living it up like nobody's business. Before Henry VIII sort of piled in there and nicked all their stuff to pay for his foreign wars. Of course, these days it would be divorce settlements as well, but he lived in simpler times. So I don't really think it's that big a story that Britain isn't a Christian nation now, say clergy. Clergy who've been singing for years, the rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. God made them high and lonely and ordered their estate. No, he didn't. He absolutely didn't. Everything Jesus ever said on the subject of rich and poor would be utterly repulsed by the idea of a rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate. But then you get Jacob Rees-Mogg casting that. Do you know that I appeared on a list of the country's most prominent Catholics alongside Jacob Rees-Mogg? Can you believe I should have sued? should be actionable, be compared to him on any level. But could you think of anybody who less embodies the teachings of Christ than a man who routinely rails against everything from inequality in the poor right through to how refugees should be treated? It's just incredible. Incredible. But it's a wonderful fig leaf. It's the most perfect piece of camouflage. If you are a beneficiary of epic inequality, whether hereditary or exploitative, to be able to turn up at church every Sunday and claim the coverage of God is the most wonderful gift that hypocrites on this earth have ever been given. Well, I'm doing some terrible things. And as a Catholic, you can go to confession. I go to confession, don't care. I'll get forgiven for everything. A few 10 Hail Marys, I'll be golden. I mean, it is remarkable, the difference between what you find in the Gospels and what you find in the hearts and minds of people in this country who claim to be Christian. And I'm going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And so here we are today. Britain can no longer be described as a Christian country. 3/4 of Church of England priests believe. The Times, for reasons that elude me, have undertaken a survey on attitudes in church and found a desire for significant changes in teaching on sex, sexuality, marriage and the role of women. I'm all in favour of that, to bring the church more into line with public opinion. Ah, dear. What's the question on this subject? I think it's a fascinating piece of research in some ways. The headline is there, isn't it? The headline is strong. What question do you ask if you want to treat this intelligently? I have derived enormous comfort over the course of my life from Christian teachings. I've had periods of quite profound faith, would you believe? I'm not in one of them now, but shortly after, most recently, when I lost my dad, who was a very devout man, and tried to live as much as he could by the teachings of the Bible, the teachings of Jesus, I couldn't really contemplate the idea that he wouldn't be receiving his reward in heaven. He believed it so completely that I felt disloyal in doubting it. And it took me back to the church for a while, and that was a wonderful thing. I derived enormous comfort from, sometimes it's meditative, sometimes you can just sit in church and derive peace, find peace, contemplation. But, you know, I'm not going to give away all my worldly chattels to the poor. I'm not going to dedicate the rest of my life to missionary work. I'm not going to do some of the stuff that Jesus told me to do. So does that make me as big a hypocrite as the politicians who claim to be Christians while voting to make the poor poorer? Are literally voting to make the poor poorer? I don't know. Britain isn't a Christian nation now, say clergy. So what, say I? 0345 6060 973. Let's just do this straight, actually. What do you put in the space created by that headline? How do you react to that headline? Britain isn't a Christian nation now. This isn't a normal phone-in. I'm not putting forward a pungent opinion that you can pick apart or agree with or oppose. Everyone's different. Everybody's relationship with religion is different. Even people who don't have any relationship with religion have a relationship with religion because their relationship with religion is defined by the absence of their relationship with religion. I think that the arguments against it are very powerful and compelling. Whether the world would be a better place if religion had never appeared, I don't know. But I also stress again that I have over the years dealt with some very impressive religious people, and I have dealt with some complete criminals as well who committed their crimes under the cloak of Christianity, under the cloak of religiosity. You don't just see it in Christianity, of course. Islamist terrorists believed that they were somehow doing the work of God in their own warped interpretations of their religious texts. But what does that mean? What does that headline mean to you? Does it make you sad? Does it make you happy? Does it make you wonder? Does it make you cross? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Britain isn't a Christian nation now, say clergy. I'm not quite sure what to make of that, except the observation that I'm not sure we ever were a Christian nation. All this is more statistical than anything else. What does it mean? We're not a nation that looks after the poor? Well, I suppose you could argue that the brief period post-1945 when we erected the welfare state and the NHS, that was probably when we were at our most Christian. Not a normal phone in this, is it? Even I didn't know I was going off in that direction. When was Britain at its most Christian? 0345 6060 973. I'll give you 1945 to 1951. Probably. But we still had epic inequality then, but we were working to fix it. We're not now. We're moving in the opposite direction. We're running away from it. Britain isn't a Christian nation now. What's your reaction to that? 0345 6060 973. Well, it's genuinely, have a think. We'll take a little breather in a second. A junction, sorry. We'll do a junction in a second. Have a little think about what your reaction is to that headline and that headline only. Britain isn't a Christian nation now. And given that I've just suggested we were probably at our most Christian between 1945 and 1951, you should realise that you can come at this question with absolutely anything you want. Let's just do it. Yeah, go back to Henry VIII's time. It turned the country into a bloodbath over arguments about different flavours of the same religion. The simple question of whether or not Rome was superior, whether all roads led to Rome. And then two of his daughters would kill each other's followers for the next couple of decades because they were practicing the wrong kind of Christianity. It's insane when you think about it. But we're not unique like that. Other religions, other countries have had similarly complicated, similarly bloody experiences. But to sit here, would you want to be a Christian country? If simply cutting off ties with Rome could lead to decades of effective civil war? What does it mean to you? What does it actually mean? And if I have to put a question there that's a little bit more substantive, rather than just saying, give us a ring, tell me what you think. And this is a pungent opinion that you can pick apart or oppose or agree with. How do you respond to my suggestion that we've never actually been a Christian country? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's 12:16.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time, and the gulf, if you like, between what was taught in the Bible and what has passed for Christianity in this country over the last 300 or 400 years is probably not the most obvious area of inquiry for a radio phone-in programme, but I have enormous faith in you. Enormous faith in you. Britain isn't a Christian nation now. What does that headline do to you? Andrea is in Huntley. Andrea, what would you like to say?
Goodness, I didn't expect you to come to me quite so quickly, James. Good morning.
You must be good. It's a full switchboard and you've come out on top, so the pressure's on now.
Oh, God. And I think, actually, that's one of the things we all do. We all pray when there's something scary happening or when there's something horrible happening. But what we don't like anymore is the liturgy of having to follow rules of a particular church. And I think, everybody used to get dressed up in their hats and gloves and go to church on a Sunday, whether you believed or not, because that's what you did.
Yes, it was a social requirement. It was a social requirement.
You stood out if you didn't. But now I think actually an awful lot of people will pray.
Yeah, but they'll also cross their fingers.
Absolutely. I believe in fairies and witches as much as I believe in God. I believe in all sorts of things. But I'm not willing to be labelled as Church of England or Catholic or whatever, because that puts me in a box that says I have to believe all their teachings, and I don't.
No, and I don't suppose anybody ever did, really. I suppose thinking back now, I could have done this differently. Britain isn't a Christian nation now. Is that good news or bad news? But
oh, goodness.
No, you don't have to answer that.
I think it's good news, actually.
Because it's always been hypocritical. You've got people going to church. You've got people stepping over the homeless on their way to church and putting 50p in the collection plate. And then, or in the case of some of the politicians that we've talked about, literally voting to make poor people poorer, and then publicly declaring themselves to be Christians or to be Catholics.
And they pat themselves on the back for going to church and say, right, that's this week done.
Yeah.
Let's get on with life.
So,
and they've ticked that box in their head that they're a good Christian because they go to church.
And the pressure on people to publicly seem to be obedient or publicly seem to be observant was really a societal construct that has now diminished. You don't get, I think of my biological mother having to give me away because of the thrall in which the church was held in Ireland in the 1970s. You can't argue that not progress.
Indeed. I mean, Kate Botley said recently that she speaks to a lot of people who will apologise and say, I'm not religious, but...
Right.
And you find that but. I'm not a churchgoer, but. And I think people do have very strong beliefs, but they're just not willing to follow a certain liturgy.
And that's probably down to the clergy rather than anything else.
Probably.
I mean, it is for me, or it was for me, during my periods of deep disillusion. It was because I encountered some deeply, deeply unpleasant and indeed paedophilic priests. Thank you, Andrea. And there it is. I mean, good news or bad news? 20-minute intro there. I could have just done that. Good news or bad news? But also the question of whether we ever were. Because, of course, we weren't. Victoria's in Doncaster. Victoria, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hello. I've actually spoken to you before about this topic.
Have you?
My question...
You make me sound like the BBC only doing repeats. When was that?
It was a few weeks back. It was to do... I can't remember the topic.
That's all right. No, don't worry. I can't remember doing this from this angle before, but here we are. There's nothing new under the sun, is there? What? Well, try and be original. Don't say exactly what you said last time.
Well, no, I am ringing up from a slightly different angle,
Thank
actually.
goodness.
So my answer to the question about what our reaction is, you've slightly changed it since, but
Yes.
my reaction is, given my experience, I'm not at all surprised.
No. What was your experience?
I actually rejoined the church a few years back with my son once he was baptised to sort of give him I wanted to introduce
give him
him to the church.
primary school place.
Well, no, but that's a different subject. And unfortunately, the more I've got involved with the church or the chapel, the more I found it to be judgmental, bigoted, homophobic, everything I stand against.
Yeah.
And I've actually now got to the point where I'm going to resign our memberships because I just don't want to be a part of it.
Well, you're of a piece with a lot of the clergy that have been surveyed for this. They want to conduct same-sex weddings. They want to drop opposition to premarital and gay sex. The results have been described by campaigners as absolutely huge, but I suspect in a lot of cases their congregations won't let them.
Well, this is it, and that's what I was going to say. That was the final crux for me, was when our church voted against the solemnisation of same-sex marriage, and that's what I rang up for last time.
That was it. Yes, I remember now.
The topic
of
that.
Yeah, because that really upset you, didn't it? That was a profound moment for you.
Absolutely, and it still is to this day, and I just can't get past it. I've tried to, but I can't.
But what's the point, Victoria? And this is what would distinguish you from some of your fellow congregants. What's the point of being in a club if it doesn't bestow benefits, right? And Christianity, obviously, the benefits it supposedly bestows are generally reserved for the next world. But that's not good enough for most humans. We want our better. So you need to impose some sort of artificial sense of superiority. So in order to be chosen, there have to be the unchosen. And that is why religion lends itself so much to the bigotries that you describe. You need to have something to rail against from the pulpit. It's not just fire and brimstone preachers that do this sort of thing, but you need to be warning the congregation against the evils of, and then you can insert whatever you want there, whether it's homosexuality or women priests or women even.
Yeah, and I think that's where lies my issue, because who are any of us to stand up in judgment of anybody else and tell them they have to live this way, that way, or that way because God says or Jesus says or the Bible says? No, nonsense, utter nonsense. It makes me so cross.
Yeah,
because
I can see why. I mean,
we're in the.
Go on.
We're in the. Well, I was going to say we're in the 21st century. Who am I to say you can't marry that man because it says in the Bible?
Yes, but you're not attracted by the notion of moral superiority, and you're not in need of a camouflage for your bad behaviour. So the two twin appeals of what you might call fake Christianity don't apply to you.
Possibly, but isn't isn't moral sorry, I forget the phrase you said.
Moral superior, you don't need to feel superior to other people. Insincerely.
No, you just need to live alongside each other and be happy and peaceful.
Which
and
is
then
what
God,
Jesus
the world
taught.
Be a totally different. Exactly, exactly. And this is where my conflict is.
I can get it. I see it clearly.
I don't think Jesus would have said, "No, sorry, you bloke can't marry you bloke." You know, love thy neighbour. So it's just.
But they need it. That's it. They need to introduce the discrimination to give the congregation the bonuses and the benefits of membership that every organisation needs, whether it's the Freemasons or the Women's Institute. You need to feel it's better to be in than out. And if all you get by being in is orders to be excellent to each other and orders to be nicer and orders to be more decent, you think, well, this is a pretty rubbish club. And then you say, oh, no, you get to slag off them over there. Oh, great, I'll have a bit of that. That's why it is so... significant to me that we stumbled across those words in that blooming hymn. It was only about 3 years ago. I wonder if anyone can remember exactly when. Someone sent it in. The rich man in his castle. That's not what he taught. It's not what Victoria believes, and yet you turn up in church and they're all for it. Especially if you can throw in a little bit of light homophobia, then they're absolutely dancing in the aisles. Literally. James is in Ashstead. James, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I'm a born-again Christian, and I would say that we've never been a Christian country. A Christian is someone who follows Jesus and Jesus' teachings, not necessarily someone who just goes to church and signs up as part of the club. So I think the Christians have always been in a minority, but society, our society has been based on a Judeo-Christian basis, the Ten Commandments, and there's a lot of good stuff, but certainly society's moving away from
I wonder if anybody... I appreciate your endeavours, but nobody gets it 100%. Nobody's living 100% by Christ's teaching. So you're inevitably talking about gradations. So it's a bit cocky to think that you're closer to it than somebody else. Do you see what I mean? I would argue nobody is.
We're saved by grace. So the whole he who says he has no sin is a liar.
Yes.
We're not saved by good works. We're saved by the work that Jesus did on the cross.
But that makes everybody Christian.
Everyone who follows Jesus.
Well,
it's open to everyone.
You can't say that because some people have never heard of him.
Well, therein, is why we proselytise and try and get people alongside us.
But I don't want to badger you on this because you sound like a nice bloke, but if you had to explain the distinction between someone that's over the line and someone who isn't, and they both think they're Christians, what would the difference be?
Do you believe in your heart that Jesus is your Lord and Saviour?
Well, everyone says yes.
Have you asked? Yes, and then.
But I don't know what's in your heart, do I? So how do I know that you're for real?
Well, no. This is the part of the thing of Christianity. It says, "Work out your salvation with fear and trembling." So we won't find out until the judgment day.
So no one can claim to be Christian, and even born again Christians.
Well, exactly. Yeah, in one sense.
Well,
yes.
in the key sense for this conversation.
If we follow Jesus, then we take him at his word. So
yeah, but you don't,
belief.
though, do you? You haven't given away.
You
haven't given away all your worldly goods to follow him. So you haven't followed Jesus to the point, to the letter, any more than anybody else has.
Well, he doesn't tell everyone to give away all their worldly goods. He told the rich young ruler to.
No, he told the apostles to as well,
didn't he?
Didn't he tell the apostles to do that as well?
No.
Are you sure?
Well,
why did they then?
They didn't, all of them. If you see, they talk about Peter's house, that Mary was afterwards they were gathered, I think, at Peter's house. They did own properties, some of them.
No, it was his dad's.
But and it says later on, a lot of the Levites sold properties and gave into the common purse. Yeah. But certainly not everyone sold everything.
No, but the ones who did are better Christians than the ones who didn't.
Quite possibly.
So we're all bad then, because none of us have done that.
Well, I'm not claiming to be.
No, I'm not. I'm not making it personal. I'm not making it personal. But you mentioned proselytising. I mean, who gets to proselytise if not the people that have given everything away to follow Christ?
Well, there's a thing. You give up your life to follow Christ.
You don't really, though, do you?
I think you do. If you truly believe,
all right,
you do.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 12. My thoughts turn to Ireland quite a lot at times like this, not least for the reasons that I shared with you a moment ago, but because the turnaround in the stranglehold that the church, the Catholic Church, of course, had upon Irish society for centuries, the loosening of that grip, the removal, really, of that grip has been so remarkable. To think that Ireland is now, in many areas, a more progressive country than the United Kingdom is incredible if you were born in the 70s or the 80s, when, you know, religion was ripping the island apart. But in the Republic, the Catholic Church's vice-like grip upon the windpipe of society looked as if it would never, ever, ever be removed. And yet here we are. Everything from, equal marriage to abortion rights and other issues. Ireland, I think, is probably more liberal than England now. And therefore, when you see the front page of the Times newspaper today, Britain isn't a Christian nation now, I wonder whether you think that's good news or bad news. And I wonder, of course, beyond that slightly binary question about what that news means to you. 0345 6060 973. Kevin's in Finchley. Kevin, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
So my answer is it's good news. And it's odd because I'm a Christian. I told your producer I go to church probably 3 times a month at least.
Yeah.
I'm really quite challenged by Christianity, just because some of the doctrine in the Bible would always challenge me. I used to always have a conversation with my mother, who would say, and I would ask her a question and say, look, if someone was born, say, the other side of the world, never heard of Christianity, didn't understand Jesus at all, are they going to hell? And she used to say yes. And Matt, I couldn't understand that.
Well, that was more your mum's interpretation than necessarily the sort of literal reading of the Gospels, I think.
Exactly. So and you just hit the nail on the head. It's about interpretation. So my interpretation of Christianity and the Bible has changed significantly since I met my wife. So my wife is born and brought up in London just like me, but she's from an Indian Punjabi Sikh heritage. Right. So she's Sikh, so I am unequally yoked, which I know for some Christians is a no-no, but I they have to accept me as I am. Yeah. And Sikhism, probably one of the most progressive religions, which believes that we are all worshipping God. We just come to Jesus or God, whatever, from a cultural perspective. And so as far as Sikhs believe is, you could pick up, the Granth Sahib, which is their book, or the Bible, or, any religious text, as long as you, are humble and you believe that there is a creator, something bigger and more important than just your little, life.
So it's live and let live.
You are...
To be glib.
Exactly.
Rather than exclusionary, which is what I was trying to identify with the previous caller. You need to give members a sense of specialness, and you can only do that by excluding others. You're describing the opposite of that, which sounds to me closer to what I understood Christianity to be growing up.
Well, and look, you have to understand this, Kate. The Bible was written by men, ultimately, okay? Men who wanted to, drive a narrative, so unfortunately to drive, propaganda. But I still believe and read the Bible because I believe that God opens up my interpretation of the text. So, a man may have tried to say, well, you should be against homosexuality. That's wrong. And I'll read it and I'll get a completely different interpretation because God is speaking to me directly through his text. He doesn't care about the man or whatever, and King Herod or whatever they wanted to say. God is speaking to me directly through his text. And one thing that Sikhs do, they do a thing called, they take a hukamnama, and it's a word of God for the day. And I will take a hukamnama out of the Bible daily. And my wife, who's a Sikh, will also take a hukamnama from the Bible because she respects my my Christianity and also respects me as a Christian.
I like that. And that's why when we read Britain Isn't a Christian Nation now, we are both seeing a very English depiction of what so-called Christianity has become, rather than what we may understand it to be, whether we have faith or not. So the idea that we no longer subscribe to a school of thought that opposes same-sex weddings or disapproves of premarital sex or gay sex, these are not things that we recognise as being Christian, and therefore the fact that we're no longer a Christian nation is good news in a sense. Can I read you something? Can I read you something? Actually, I'm going to hijack you with this, Kevin. Ready? Okay. This is from Liz. Yep. It says, to the Christian on the radio now, don't tell me how often you go to church every month. Tell me how often you feed a hungry person or help someone find a home. I want to see your actions beyond sitting and listening to a fallible man's interpretation of a book written 2,000 years ago based on a collection of stories reinterpreted by a king. Adds Liz.
Yeah, okay, so I can come back with that. So as a Christian, I'm a member of a Christian charity organisation called BESON. So BESON, North London is the one I'm linked to, and we do a lot of charitable work. I'm actually a trustee. So I go out
That's Liz told.
So, yeah, okay.
But also, a proper Christian, literally, Liz, get back in your box, a proper Christian literally wouldn't ring in and talk about that, because when it comes to charity, the left hand should not know what the right hand is doing. Am I right?
Exactly. And then just quickly to put it, and also to put to bed, and also to put to bed, Sikhs believe in what they call seva.
Right.
Seva, S-E-V-A, which is effectively service to God, is we feed the poor. So if you go to, I think it's Charing Cross, by Charing Cross Station,
it tends to be on the other side of the road.
And there's lots of Sikhs feeding the poor, and that's what people of God do. And we don't.
And so do plenty of people who don't believe in God. I'm just preempting my inbox. There's still loads and loads of people who don't believe in God who do lots of good things as well. But from a sense of the general good, or a pursuit of a happier planet, a peaceful population, whether there is because you think that's what God wants, or whether it is just because it's what you want, or whether it's a combination of the two, it's got to be better than not doing anything. Kevin, thank you. I enjoyed that. I don't know much about Sikhism. Ashling's in Norwich. Aisling, what would you like to say?
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. I myself have always been brought up as a Catholic, and of course during my life we go up through ups and downs, and we might walk away for a while, and we might come back, we might not. However, I've gone through some trauma in my life, a bit like your own situation. I had a baby when I was young and had to give it up for adoption.
Okay.
Did I blame the church? No. Did I blame the God that loves me? No.
I can't hear quite what you're saying, Aisling. The phone line's not good enough. It's not your fault, but I don't want you to tell this story without me being able to listen properly. So I'm going to put you back to the producer. We'll try and sort out that phone line if we can, and then I'll come back to you. Possibly after the next junction, but because I'm already, inevitably, as you'd expect, very drawn into what you're saying. Josh is in Chiswick. Josh, what would you like to say?
Well, James, as an atheist, if the UK is no longer a Christian nation, I'd say thank God for that, really. I mean,
you can't do that. Hang on a minute. Hey, that doesn't... What? Who?
What?
Thank what? Who?
I mean, obviously that was a poor attempt at humour.
Yes, it was very good. It was a very good attempt at humour.
But also, I think really...
This is it. It's the big man. The big man's interfering with the phones, Josh. Yours has gone funny as well. This is it. He's not having it. He's not enjoying this conversation. It's your fault for being a flipping atheist. I don't. Will any call? We'll be able to hear anybody now between now and 1 o'clock when I think Sangeeta is in for Sheila again. Sorry, Josh, mate. It was the phone line. Miranda's in Ealing. Miranda, what would you like to say?
Hopefully mine isn't messing up as well.
Depends how devout you are, Miranda.
Well, basically, my thoughts are that the mainline church, Catholic, Anglican, many people who attend that are doing it sort of nominally. They've done it all their life, throughout their childhood.
It's habitual.
And so they are falling away. Whereas I think the evangelical branch is actually thriving quite a lot, but just sort of under the radar.
Yes,
it's the same in America.
They've got the bigger congregation certainly, and the more action within society. But is there not Does the evangelical... You need to help me out a little bit on this. Are there downsides to it? What about the sort of equal marriage side of things and stuff like that?
Well, evangelical is such a massive branch. It sort of varies between sort of hyper-liberal to extremely conservative.
Okay, fair enough.
And
what's the difference then for the uninitiated? What's the difference between an evangelical church and a traditional church?
Traditional churches are very much sort of, they have obviously the Pope and they have elders and bishops that are high up, and they believe that the Eucharist is like actually the body of Christ.
Well, Catholics do. Protestants don't.
That sort of stuff. It's just far more based on tradition and sort of doing, like confessional, all of that kind of stuff, which a lot of evangelicals do not.
Oh,
practice.
okay. So what do you worship? What you mean the accoutrements of religion rather than the essence? Then, so the evangelical congregation would focus on the words and the prayers.
I mean it's a lot less. It's a lot less based on the works. I would say that might be a little bit controversial.
No.
Many Catholics are listening in, but
you're talking to them.
All right, yes. But anyway, I think the main reason that people are being put off as well is because sort of misinformation is spread about a lot of churches. The amount of times I hear people say that the Bible is pro-slavery and anti-women, I would disagree massively to that.
Well, the New Testament isn't, but the Old Testament is.
I disagree.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd say,
it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear in Leviticus and elsewhere. I don't want to get into an argument, but what's the evangelical relationship with New Testament and Old Testament? And is the Old Testament still considered valid?
Well, I don't want to speak for all evangelicals,
just speak for you.
But for me, yes, Old Testament is just as important as the New Testament. Yes.
Okay, so that would be, in the minds of the clergy, saying that Britain isn't a Christian nation now, it would be beliefs like yours that are actually alienating people.
Well, I mean, I think it would be foolish to totally dismiss half of the Bible. If you're a Christian, that would be a very foolish thing to do, because it all works in one. It's one whole story. There's the Abrahamic covenant, and I believe that's very important.
Okay. Peace be with you.
Thank you.
12:46.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Front page of the Times. Britain isn't a Christian country, a Christian nation now, say clergy. Just pause for a minute. I don't know how old you are, but just dip back a decade. And now dip back two. Imagining the same headline appearing, all right, 20 years ago. Britain isn't a Christian nation now. 30 years ago. It's funny, isn't it, how the world turns. Would have been inconceivable. I must watch The Princess Bride again. Would have been inconceivable if, when I was 11, that headline appeared on the front page. I mean, admittedly, I had a very religious upbringing. Simply by that, I mean, I was sent to what we call religious schools. I wasn't sort of, forced to dress in sackcloth and ashes or anything like that. But religion was a huge part of my education. At all three of my schools, actually. I went from a convent to a Catholic prep school that had very close links with the local church. And then I went to a monastic boarding public school. So, I mean, that's about as religious as it gets unless you go to an actual seminary. But beyond that, still, even if you never went to church in your life, when 40 years ago, if you'd read a front page headline saying Britain isn't a Christian nation now, it would have stopped you in your tracks. I think today we're mostly a combination of, yeah, fair enough, or even a little bit meh. Are you a little bit meh on this one? What does it mean to you, this headline? And is it good news or bad news? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. 10 to 1 is the time. Leon is in Dresden. Leon, what would you like to say?
Hello. How are you doing?
Very well, Leon. What's on your mind?
Well, I am an atheist.
Yes.
My mother and father are Roman Catholics.
Right.
My dad is actually an Irish Roman Catholic, so he's quite
old school.
Strict.
Yes.
Yeah, old school. Yeah. When I grew up, I was introduced to the church, obviously, and I was persuaded to go to church every day and, follow the books. The question about Britain now, sort of breaking out of the C of E thing is a good thing. Like you mentioned before, the Irish, the island, Republic of Ireland, has now sort of become a better place. With people being allowed to do things like same-sex marriages.
It feels that way. It feels that way to me as well. Well, do we lose? Do we lose anything? Is there? I love that Christopher Hitchens quote, which a couple of people have sent to me. Keith in Willesden Green gets the credit. Name me a single good act committed in the name of God that could not have been carried out in the absence of religion. I don't know what you were like growing up, Leon, but I think that I probably would have got into even more trouble than I did if I wasn't being raised as a Catholic. I did have Catholic guilt. There's stuff I didn't do that I would have done. All perfectly legal, I stress, but not necessarily approved of by the Almighty. So, I mean, do we lose anything by moving away from Christianity?
We don't. We just have to have some mechanisms in place to replace that sort of teachings. Should I say? Because, I mean, if you look back in history, like Henry VIII was Church of England founder, let's say, and he had friends, Thomas More, and Thomas More, he killed Thomas More because Thomas More was a Roman Catholic and refused to join Henry and acknowledge Henry as the Church of England.
As the head of the church, yes.
Yeah, and then Thomas More as well executed people in London because they had the Bible written in English. So, but then
it's all bonkers, isn't it? This is what I mean. But I mean, I talked a lot about English Christianity, but it could have been any other country as well. You could look at the conflicts in France and Spain and other countries of people not being devout enough, or being put to death for having the wrong books in their house, even though they worship the same God ostensibly. So it's not peculiar to England. But this idea of it's only worth being a member if it bestows benefits that other people can't have, and you can only really persuade people that they've got benefits that other people can't have if you're attacking the people for not having them. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. I mean, the whole. I don't mind personally people expressing their faith, but when their expressions of faith start impacting other people who are may have the same faith or may not have the same faith, but if they start impacting physically or mentally on those people, then I have sort of a kind of way.
That should be the cut-off point. I'm with you on that. Finally, Leon, when and how did you become an atheist? Just if you don't mind me asking.
You don't become an atheist. Atheism is, the belief in God as theist, and I just.
Well, you do. When did you realise you were an atheist? Then I'll phrase the question more carefully.
Yeah. Well, about 16.
Okay.
15, 16.
And how did your mum and dad deal with it?
I was actually brought up in a. They were kind of not happy in a broadcastable phrase, not happy word.
Fine.
And I find it really strange that people of religion want to swear a lot. But anyway, with my mum and dad. But
did they
about 15, 16.
Okay, and did they think it was just a phase?
They thought at first, but then when I started quoting Bible verses at them and saying, "What was this about?"
To prove your yes, fair enough.
Yeah,
fair enough. I like it. Thank you, Leon. The 15 or 16 is probably quite a common age. I'm just hearing that the judges will now be given the power to order an offender to attend a sentencing hearing, including by force if necessary, under new planned legislation announced by the Ministry of Justice, just come in from PA, from the Press Association, which is interesting. More government by tabloid headline, really. If you want to read about why this is a lot more complicated, and they were all calling for it, all party leaders, all the newspapers, after Lucy Letby refused to stand in the dock for her sentencing. Read the Secret Barrister's blog on this subject if you want to have a slightly better understanding of it than the politicians that have decided to enact this or seek to introduce this legislation. It's not fair on police officers either. Police officers are going to be ordered to drag people into the dock. And then, of course, you think, well, some of them will volunteer to do it, and they would be the last ones you'd want to do it. But anyway, I hope I'm wrong. Simon's in Croydon. Back to Christianity. Simon, what would you like to say?
Hi. Sorry,
Hi.
a bit bad timing because I'm at work.
Where were you before? What were you doing when you rang in?
No, I was just getting the van loaded up.
Oh, okay. Well, how long have you been on hold?
For about 15 minutes.
Well,
not that long. No.
But I don't want to distract you from your labours.
No, you're right. You're good. I parked up.
All right, you got 2 minutes. What are you going to say?
About this conversation about Britain becoming an atheist country. Is that right?
It's sort of not a Christian country anymore. It's not necessarily becoming an atheist country, but a majority of the clergy don't think we can call ourselves a Christian nation anymore.
Well, why did they say that? I mean, what's the reason why they say this? What's some of the reasons?
I appreciate you're working, but I've done all this already. I did it an hour ago. I've been through. You literally want me to do a rehearsed introduction to the entire programme with 3 minutes to go for the benefit of Simon in his van.
No. All right, let me get this out.
Go
what
on,
I think's happening here is,
yeah,
I think the nation has become reliant on hearing what God has to say through men rather than God himself.
Yeah.
I mean, what the point I'm making is we don't need to ask permission to put our left foot in front of our right. We can use our brains to determine that. So it's the same thing with God. If God wants to, God has spoken through what we call the Bible, right? Through his word. And we have a brain. So we have intuition. So we can speak to God and God can relate to us what his interpretation of what he's trying to say to us is. Rather than going, anyone could read something and then fit that to fit their agenda, if you see what I'm saying. So
of course they do. Yes, and they do frequently.
If God says that he doesn't want this, that's simply what it means. It's not hard. It's not rocket science. You know what I mean? So people get
it's a bit more complicated than that. We had a caller earlier equating giving the Old Testament equal value to the New Testament, which makes it almost impossible to determine what God wants.
Well, not really.
It does, mate. You can't turn the other cheek and smote your neighbour at the same time, can you?
Smote your neighbour? No,
smite your neighbour. Smite your neighbour, mate. Smite.
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 No, well, smite.
Smite.
As in...
Smite, S-M-I-T-E, smite your neighbour for doing you a disservice.
Right.
You can't sell your daughter into slavery if she comes from a country not immediately adjacent to your own, which the Old Testament says you can, while not thinking that you can own other human beings, which the New Testament teaches.
No, well, look, we have servants today, right? Slaves in another form. You could use the word slaves, but we have servants today. In the royal palace, they have servants. They have people working.
But they get
for
paid.
They're not.
They get paid. They're not slaves.
Well, didn't the slaves get paid?
They can go home at night. They can go home at night. They're not owned. They can resign. There you go. That might help.
All right. Well, the slaves in the old world, are you comparing slaves today to the old? I mean, we don't want to sidetrack.
You are.
No,
it's not a sidetrack. I'm just pointing out it's not as easy as you think. I don't want to sort of rain on your.
It's very easy.
It's not very. I've just proved to you why it isn't easy.
How did you prove it? How did you do that?
By pointing out the different teachings on slavery, depending on whether you're reading the Old or New Testament.
I was going to explain it to you, but you haven't given me a chance, really, have you?
I've given you loads of chances. You didn't even know what the topic was when you rang in. You were too busy trying to reverse your van.
I was obviously because I was getting the van loaded.
I know, and now we've run out of time.
Well, fair enough.
So next time, yeah?
You've missed out.
We'll do it next. So have you. We'll do it next time.
Definitely will.
Well, there you go. It's coming up to 12:59. That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Play. A couple of highlights, actually, might be worth picking out. You can also, of course, rewind live radio, so you can listen to them again in case you couldn't believe your ears the first time. You'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. That's Rewind Live Radio on Global Player. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sorbrick with you at 4, but now it's time for Sangeeta Maiskar.
James O'Brien on LBC.